What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Fem Naruto hides her strength? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. If you ask anyone in Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaves, they would have told you immediately and without hesitation that Uzumaki Naruko was, without a doubt, one very strong child. Of course, they would say this with a frown or an outright sneer at the mention of the girl's name, but the fact remained that no one could deny that Uzumaki Naruko was strong. Now, when someone hears this, especially in a ninja village, they start to assume that this Naruko girl is a talented genin or chunin. They would assume that she had been taken under the wing of a ninja of some renown or, and this is a secret mind you, that she received help from the demonic entity sealed within her chakra system. Whatever the background, they would assume that Uzumaki Naruko was a great up-and-coming ninja, probably with amazing chakra control, a horde of jutsu at her disposal, proficiency with at least a dozen different weapons and maybe even a talent for seals. They would probably picture her as the type that would capture a room the second she entered it, gave impassioned speeches to rouse the spirit and gave off an aura that made it almost impossible to dislike her when you got to know her. This could not have been farther from the truth. Naruko wasn't a genin or chunin. Hell, she wasn't even in the academy and hadn't stepped foot inside the building once in her life. She had never spoke to any ninja of renown who might have been impressed with her enough to consider training her officially and had never met that which she contained, nor did she know of its existence. She held no particular desire to become a ninja and had never utilized her chakra in her life. She had never held a jutsu scroll or ninja weapon before, had no clue about seals whatsoever, and she sure as hell never captured the attention of a room or gave off any such warm aura that made you fall in love with her within a few moments of meeting her. Oh, Naruko was indeed strong. But she was none of these other things. To even begin to understand the enigma that is Uzumaki Naruko, one would first have to understand her past. Naruko was born in Konoha General Hospital, in room 331, just after 7 p.m. on October 10, 1590 AF. That's 1,590 years after the elemental nations were founded, or AF for those who don't know. Naruko's birth had taken a little over 11 hours, but luckily there were no complications to speak of. Unless of course, you count a 100-story tall ravenous demon attacking the village a complication. Sadly, Naruko's mother, the lively Uzumaki Kushina, passed away shortly after giving birth to her daughter. The passionate redhead had discovered very early on in her pregnancy that she suffered from a medical condition which made giving birth to any child an almost suicidal endeavor because of the strain it would put on her body, and as such the doctors had strongly advised that she terminate the pregnancy before it was too late to do so. Those same doctors were later admitted into their own hospital for numerous injuries, mostly to the genitals, which ironically would make the act of conceiving a baby extremely painful. Kushina had warned those doctors lucky enough to avoid becoming patients themselves that giving birth to a child of her own was her greatest dream, and that if she would die bringing her baby into the world, then she would go on to the afterlife with a smile on her face, content to watch her child from afar until, many years from then, her little boy or girl joined her, hopefully with stories of grandbabies and great-grandbabies to share. She kept her condition a secret, knowing that many would try to talk her out of her decision, and when she gave birth to a healthy baby girl 9 months later, Uzumaki Kushina, after holding her child for 3 whole minutes, telling Naruko how much she loved her and how sorry she was that she wouldn't be there, passed on with a smile, her daughter in her arms. In official records, Uzumaki Naruto's biological father is listed as unknown. Most just assumed that Kushina either lost her love to a mission or had decided that she wanted a baby but not a partner to share it with, as many kunoichi do. It was known only to a select few that Naruko's father was in fact Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage himself, lest the small family become targets to those who wished revenge on the Yellow Flash of Konoha after his actions in the Third Great Shinobi War. It was nearly 10 minutes after the red-headed mother's passing that her jackass of a husband, who was too damn noble for his own good, as she would later call him, repeatedly, loudly and at length, heard word that his wife had passed on giving birth to a healthy baby girl. Minato immediately abandoned the front lines, leaving little instruction for his poor soldiers, to find his wife dead and his daughter crying loudly at the loud noises outside. Minato collapsed at his wife's side with tears steaming down his face and his daughter clutched to his chest. When he finally managed to collect himself, he hauled his tired body to his feet and carried himself and his daughter towards the Hokage tower, steeling himself with all his considerable resolve for what he was about to do. He collected a special scroll from his library and, praying for his love and his child to one day forgive him, made his way towards the front lines. Hours later, Minato's predecessor, now successor, Sarutobi Hiruzen, his master Jiraiya and the elders Homura, Kaharu and Danzo sat in the dark Hokage's office with a sleeping Naruko lying in a cot on the table. The blanket moved aside to reveal a dark seal of amazing complexity on her chubby belly. They talked throughout the night about what should be done with the child. It was quickly established that Sarutobi could not take her into his house given the risk posed by assassins that would be out for the weakened village's old leader like sharks sensing bait. Jiraiya declined the offer as well, saying that he was the last person that should be left responsible of a child and that he would be constantly on the move keeping up with his information network, leaving him with no time to raise her properly. They doubted that one of the clans would have her, and Danzu's proposal to have the girl trained to utilize her new demonic chakra was immediately shot to hell by Sarutobi, Jiraiya and Kaharu, who knew that if she was given over to Danzo, the poor girl would be reduced to an emotionless husk by the time she was 4. They argued back and forth for hours, none being able to come up with an idea that suited all parties until Sarutobi reluctantly agreed to place the baby in one of the village orphanages. So that's what they did. This, unfortunately, didn't put an end to Naruko's problems entirely. Life at the orphanage was tolerable at best, unfailingly depressing at worst. The workers at the orphanage held true to the orders given to them by the Hokage when he dropped the girl off, but did no more than they were ordered. They fed, clothed and housed the girl, but beyond that, Naruko was on her own. If she was sad, no workers would try to cheer her up. If she was lonely, nobody would talk to her, and if she was ever caught up to no good, then she received the harshest punishments with no questions asked or answer given. While she was never beaten or starved, and while bullying her was never encouraged, Naruko quickly grew tired of the prison she had grown up in, and in her 4th year she simply packed her few belongings and left in the middle of the night. That was that. That was the last time anyone had seen Naruko. Of course, she didn't leave the village. It was a long step from leaving an orphanage to leaving what was essentially a 4-year-old's entire world, and the prospect of venturing outside the walls was something that she wasn't really ready for. That was 10 years ago now. Now Naruko, aged 14, was living independently and free of the constraints she was forced to endure at the orphanage. She had her own place, took care of her own needs, and had since grown into a fine young woman. Naruto strolled down the street with an easy gait that was just fast enough as to not be considered slow. She took her time, as though there was nothing in the world that worried her, which was true. Her cool blue eyes stared forward and her face appeared relaxed and almost bored. The cool winds blew by, tugging slightly at the short ends of her hair as she made her way towards the fruit market near her house. She preferred the fresh product bought from crates packed onto carts in the square where every day, stall owners and hagglers bartered and traded. The market was the preferred place for fruit produce in the village since it reminded people of a simpler time, and the cheap prices didn't hurt either. The crowds parted before her as she walked, but none looked her in the eye, their gazes passing over the girl as if she wasn't there. No one said anything if she jostled them in the bustle of the crowds, and they didn't respond if she asked them to move, instead just stepping aside quietly, not meeting her eyes. She didn't care. She preferred it this way. As she passed a small store, she caught her reflection in one of the tall mirrors that were on sale. It was easy to tell that Naruko was beautiful and that her beauty would only grow as she got older. Soft, slightly spiky dark red hair was cut short, framing in fine, sculpted face, the only imperfections being 3 small lines on each cheek which greatly resembled an animal's whiskers. Above these, 2 perfectly almond-shaped eyes of striking icy blue watched sharply but gave away absolutely nothing. Her face was impassive, as it always was. Smiles were a rare thing with Naruko. Not that she was depressed or anything, it was just the way she was. As cool and composed as a winter ice sculpture, that was Uzumaki Naruko. A slender neck gracefully curved into deceptively delicate-looking shoulders which in turn flowed into thin arms which were toned to near perfection. As many a pervert would gladly attest to, Naruko was rather well-developed for her age, gaining a smooth hourglass figure and bust that would render supermodels green with envy. Round hips dipped to form long, strong legs that lacked a hint of fat, being made of the same toned muscle that made up the rest of her body. All of this was accentuated slightly by the black tank top she wore tucked into a pair of slightly baggy black pants which fell over a pair of small, sneaker-covered feet. A short black jacket was left open to allow cool air to caress her body in the sweltering summer heat. Yes, Naruko was beautiful, but this didn't matter. Not to her. While she had looks, her personality was less than sociable. She had earned the title of Ice Queen, and wore it with pride and with such skill that even the famed Uehige Kurenai would be hard-pressed to replicate it. The amount of times a smile had been seen on her face could be counted on one hand with plenty of digits left over, and when she spoke it was with the same calm, calculated tone she had become famed for. For her, emotions were a rare thing and outbursts were non-existent. Self-control was her lifeblood, it seemed. She needed no one and wanted no one. Couple this with an extremely sharp mind, vast intelligence and a will you could bend chakra-reinforced steel around and you had one strong girl. Naruko blinked at her reflection and turned away, continuing onward towards the market. Her steps kicked up dust on the dirt streets as she turned into the alley that led to the out-of-the-way square where the market was set up, and she could already see the crowds gathering. Naruko pushed past the assembled groups of mothers chatting with their friends as their energetic children ran to and fro between the stalls, their high-pitched laugh which mixed with the general roar of the marketplace. Packs of elderly women, decked out in their finest Sunday clothes, chatted about the latest weekly gossip while the stall owners bellowed out their deals, each trying to drown out the competition in terms of volume. A few fast food stands hissed and steamed as they served hot meals to the hungry masses, the smells creating a mouth-watering aroma which wafted over the area. The smells and sounds and colors made the scene look like something straight out of a history book telling of the simpler times before modernization destroyed the concept of a close-knit community. Naruko slid between two men discussing restocking their stall, swerving to avoid the small child who had discovered the fun of spinning in one place until he fell down, then proceeded to make her way between the stalls, her sharp eyes critically analyzing the wares, looking for the most ripe, juicy, succulent products available. The stall owners said nothing as she examined their stalls before moving on. They knew it was unwise to deny her service. When Naruko had discovered this little marketplace a few years ago, she had attempted to buy fruit from one of the stalls, only to be rebuffed by its owner, a rather robust man with a spectacular black mustache. The man had berated her loudly, gaining the attention of most of the market, telling her that she wasn't welcome and that she had better leave if she knew what was good for her. Calmly, Naruko had tried to reason with the man only for him to start raving, calling for Anbu. Naruko had just stared at him for a long minute before turning and walking out of the market. The man had smiled, thinking he was rid of her. Oh, how wrong he was. Naruko had returned a few hours later. She had procured a rather lavish cloaked hood from the washing line of one of Konoha's more well-off homes, which she fully intended to return, of course. With the cloak wrapped around her and the hood pulled over her face, Naruko had returned to the same stall she had been chased from earlier that day. The owner smiled hugely seeing the stylish cloak, thinking he had gained a particularly wealthy customer. His smile was replaced by a scowl as the figure lifted its head just enough for him to see the face of the person under the hood. It was the Uzumaki brat he'd chased off earlier. He'd opened his mouth to berate her once more but was stopped short when she raised one hand before her, a bag of apples clutched in her fist which had a tear in the netting. Before he could say anything, Naruko's voice spoke out loudly, gaining as much attention as his had earlier. "What's this?" she bellowed, her voice disguised enough that it could pass for the voice of a young man entering his 20s. Before the stall owner could collect his wits, she pressed on. "I bought these from you earlier for my lord's dinner which was attended by numerous figures of note." Imagine his surprise when one of the guests, a wealthy merchant no less, discovered a hole in one of these apples. When it was cut open we found a fully grown worm had eaten the core and it was still there. "How do you explain this, merchant?" The man spluttered and choked, seeing the crowds giving him distrusting looks and placing the fruit they were going to buy back on the tables with looks of disgust. But what?" Naruko barked, not giving him a chance to answer. "My lord expected quality goods from one of Konoha's famed markets and instead you insult him with this trash." She threw the apples into the man's arms, watching as he scrambled to catch them. Be sure that my lord will never allow himself to suffer this level of disgrace from you again. He may even go before the Hokage if this is the kind of service he can expect from Konoha. With that, she spun on her heels and marched from the marketplace, her borrowed cloak billowing out behind her, making sure that no one saw her face. If they did, then the plan would fall apart at the seams. The damage was done. Word had spread of the confrontation and the stall's poor quality goods to every ear in the market, and people avoided it like the plague. The stall's owner couldn't believe what happened. Within the space of 10 minutes his business had gone from booming to non-existent. He tried to regain his customers, saying that it was the Uzumaki girl causing trouble as usual, but no one believed him. Uzumaki couldn't afford a cloak of that quality, and besides, the voice that spoke was the of a man, so they ignored the panicked man and moved on. By then end of the week he was ruined. He was forced to sell his place in the market and move on, accepting a job cleaning rivers for Konoha Environmental Control. The other stall owners who had known him for many years actually believed him when he said that Uzumaki was involved, and they realized that the confrontation was supposed to send a message to the other merchants, one which they heard loudly and clearly. The message was, "Allow me to buy what I want without incident and I won't ruin you." Naruko never faced any problems from that day forward. She took full advantage of her well-earned equality today, taking her time as she traveled from stall to stall, picking and choosing what she wanted. By the time an hour had passed, she had fresh apples, oranges, some carrots, a few spices, some onions, a stalk of celery and a couple of potatoes. She had plans for soup tonight, and it looked like it would be a good broth. She paid for her purchases, thanked the owners, ignored their silence, and left the market, heading for home. Checking the battered watch strapped to her wrist, she saw that it was only going on to 1 p.m. She had an entire day to kill. Maybe she'd take a walk or see if she could find work for the day. Her thoughts were broken when someone jostled her from behind, causing her to stumble slightly. Her hand immediately flew to her pocket, patting it down. Her wallet was gone. She spun, her eyes immediately locking onto the figure who was moving slightly faster than those around him, moving in the exact opposite direction of Naruko. Tucking her bag of groceries securely under her arm, Naruko began to follow the figure, matching his pace. She moved easily through the crowds, not once bumping into anyone as her cold blue eyes kept locked onto her quarry. When the figure's head turned, their eyes locked. Her blue to his green. The boy looked to only be a little older than her if the acne dotting his face was any indication, and seemed a little panicky. Probably his first time as a pickpocket, she thought. The second he met that icy blue stare, the boy lost his meager composure and broke into a flat-out run, knocking people to the ground in his haste. Naruko ran after him, her eyes never leaving the boy's back. She weaved between the confused and angry passers-by like a panther through the forest stalking its prey. Her legs took long, quick strides, powering her towards the thief, her natural quick-footedness and reflexes allowing her to dodge the people who were attempting to get to their feet after being knocked down by the fleeing teen. Angry shouts filled the air, but Naruko paid them no heed, intent on getting her money back. She saw him duck into an alley up ahead, and she quickly followed, not once faltering in her pace. The other teen glanced over his shoulder, seeing the girl hot on his heels and gaining fast. He tipped a trash can as he passed it, hoping to slow her down, but to his increasing dismay she simply leapt over it with cat-like grace. He nearly jumped out of his skin when two dogs suddenly burst from behind a pile of cardboard boxes, barking madly. He staggered but managed to pass them, barely avoiding one sinking its teeth into his calf. Naruto saw the dogs appear and altered her course slightly. She jumped into the air before landing on the lid of one of the trash cans and sprung over the mutts, ignoring their incessant barking. She burst from the alley to see the thief duck into another one further up the street. She knew that alley and what lay at the end of it. The boy was officially freaking out. That girl somehow knew he was the one who took her wallet, then proceeded to chase him through the streets, and no matter what he did he couldn't lose her. She matched his speed easily, and while he wasn't known for his speed he was faster than some, but she kept up with him all the way. He'd hoped the dogs would have ended the chase, but still ducked into another alley to get away, only to find the damn place led to a dead end. He spun, hoping he had enough time before she got past the dogs, only to stop cold. The girl had caught him. Naruko ran flat out towards the thief, her face as calm as ever. As she came nearer, she drew one arm back and as soon as she was within range, swung forward with all her might. Boom! The deafening blast reverberated through the alley and out into the streets as a large dust cloud erupted from blocked-off end of the small back street. When the rumble died, the smoke slowly cleared to reveal the thief huddled into a ball at the foot of the wall, shaking violently. As he heard the echo of the mini-explosion die, he slowly, hesitantly, opened his eyes only to flinch back from the arctic gaze boring into his eyes. His head slowly turned to the side and his eyes widened and his jaw dropped in both astonishment and horror. Barely a foot from where his head lay, Naruko's fist was implanted into the wall. Massive cracks surrounded a crater in the center of the concrete partition a foot in diameter, nearly punching straight through into the building. Naruto's fist, Naruko's thin, slender fist, had damn near punched through a nearly foot-thick blockade of concrete and metal. As the girl withdrew her hand from the building's new entrance, the boy's eyes widened even further if that was even possible. Her hand, apart from being a little dusty, didn't have a scratch on it. The flawless, creamy smooth skin was unblemished, not even a little red from the impact, and by the look on her face she probably didn't even feel any pain. Naruko blew the dust from her hand, rubbing the more stubborn particles off, before looking at the teen who flinched back wondering if she had simply missed and was preparing to take another swing. He gave a small whimper and shut his eyes tight as her hand started to reach towards him. This was it. He was going to die at the hands of this young girl, all because he needed a little extra cash. He didn't want to die. Huh? He thought as he felt something being slid from his pocket. His eyes cracked open to see Naruko with her wallet in hand, going through it to make sure the money was all there. Every penny counted after all. After she determined that nothing had been taken, her eyes fell on the boy who suddenly looked like a cornered animal. "Oh God, I'm sorry," he practically screamed, holding his arms before him as if to shield himself from the girl who just stared at him impassively. "I'm sorry, I just needed cash. I didn't know it was going to be such a big problem. Please don't kill me." He was near tears by the end. Naruko stared at the shuddering teen for a few long moments before speaking. "Don't steal from me again." She turned from him, ignoring his frantic nodding and blubbering thanks. Readjusting the grocery bag under her arm, she slid her wallet into the inside pocket of her jacket and calmly walked out of the alley like it had never happened. As she walked back through the crowds, some of whom were still trying to pick themselves up from the thief's desperate run, she checked her watch. 1:10 p.m. She'd wasted 10 minutes of her time with that boy. Shaking her head, she continued on through the crowds, making her way towards her home. Home for Uzumaki Naruko took the form of a rather ramshackle shack built on top of an apartment building in the more desolate parts of Konoha. The building's wide roof, coupled with the positioning of the buildings around it, meant that Naruko had plenty of space and was shielded from prying eyes. The shack took up most of the apartment complex's wide roof, so her home was also quite large. She had stumbled on it completely by accident a few weeks after leaving the orphanage. The staircase that led to the roof of the building was located in a decrepit, trash-strewn back garden located between the buildings. The only way into it was in the alley beside the apartments, through a small gap in the fence that concealed the garden, totally hidden unless you knew where to look for it. The windows that looked down on the garden were all covered in metal sheets, the back doors leading into the buildings replaced with heavy steel doors meant to keep possible squatters out. Naruko grunted as she slid the makeshift door she had constructed herself aside. It was made of 2 corrugated sheets of iron connected by 4 small metal tubes set into their corners. Naruko had cut 2 sections out of the metal fence away from the hole before adding the sheets, creating a rather effective sliding door that blended perfectly with the fence. She stepped through and slid the door shut behind her, making sure no one saw her secret entrance. She walked through the overgrown grass, stepping over the bottles, wrappers, steel wire, rubble and other discarded trash that littered the garden before reaching the crumbling stairs built into the back of one of the buildings, reaching up to the roof. She mounted the steps easily, making sure to avoid the weaker sections of the structure. When she reached the top, her face softened slightly as she gazed upon her home for the last 10 years. The shack was in far better condition than anyone would expect. Instead of a poorly constructed mass of wood and metal barely big enough to fit one person, the shack was more like a cabin built onto the roof. While it was far from lavish, it was a godsend to a homeless orphan. The walls were skillfully built using any available material, mostly wood and corrugated iron, with one or two small windows of cracked glass. She didn't know who built the shack or when it was built, she was just thankful that she found it. The view from the top of the building was great, and on either side, boxing in the garden below, were the roofs of two more buildings, with another across the alley. One was used to hand her small amount of laundry, and the other was a small kind of recreational area with no real purpose but was cluttered with junk. Stepping up to the door, Naruko fished around in her coat pocket for a second before withdrawing a small, slightly twisted piece of metal. Inserting it into a crack in the door, she fumbled for a second before hearing a dull scraping sound as the metal bar inside the door fell away, undoing the primitive lock. Twisting the handle, Naruko stepped inside her house, closing the door behind her firmly. The next day, Naruto left her house early for work. While it wasn't possible for her to get any real jobs what with her age and the fact that she was the Uzumaki girl, she still managed to make a decent living doing odd jobs around the village. Her biggest clients were merchants who were only in the village for a few days before leaving again, thus not knowing of her reputation. She delivered goods, packed crates, filled in shipping orders to whatever else she could to make money. Employers were always willing to accept her help either for her sharp mind or for her physical strength, which teetered on the fine line between being impressive and being monstrous. Her job today was stacking crates for a local fishmonger. Not the most glamorous job, but she never complained. Tori-san was paying her good money for her help today. She quickly made her way towards the warehouse district, making her way between the large structures and through groups of workers hauling their wares to the next destination. She made her way around the back of one building and rapped loudly on the door there. After a few minutes of waiting, the door was pulled open with a squeak and Naruko was admitted to the bustling warehouse which reeked of fish. "Good, you're early," Togori the foreman's gravely voice said as he closed the door behind the girl. He waved her over to where a dozen or so large crates sat, ready to be moved. "I need these moved into the freezers before they thaw completely. One of the idiots that work for me actually managed to break one of my forklifts, so we're a little slow today. Think you can handle that?" "I'll be done soon, Togori-san," she assured him as she made her way over to the crates. The stocky fishmonger watched with a slight smirk as the guys watched the girl grasp one crate tightly, and he laughed aloud at their faces as the daintily looking kid lifted the crate with little effort and maneuvered it towards the freezers. He shook his head as he went back to his office. Despite the problems some of the guys had with the girl, she sure as hell pulled her own weight. Naruko grunted as she set the first crate down near the back of the freezer, her breath misting before her. Shrugging off the cold, she made her way back to the loading area for another crate. Haruno Sakura huffed and puffed as she struggled to carry several heavy trays of dead, smelly fish over to the cooling chests they were supposed to be loaded into. Why the hell was she lugging around these gross things anyway? Oh yeah, it was their mission. Since the summer was nearly upon them, many of Konoha's genin were called up to help in the preparations for the many summer festivals. That meant plenty of food, drink, spices and other goods had to be stocked and ready. Teams 7, 8 and 10 had been ordered to help at Tagori's fishmongers for the day. They'd only been at it for a half an hour so far, and already she was tired, sweaty and reeked of fish. Oh god, what must she look like to Sasuke? Stop slacking off, forehead, and actually pitch in for once. A voice said from behind her. She turned to glare at the pretty blonde who had spoken. If you had been paying attention, Piglet, you would have realized that I was taking a break. Plus I've piled more trays than you. Yamanaka Ino scoffed, tossing her long ponytail over her shoulder. Tilting her head, she gave the pinkette her most condescending look. Sure you did. I suppose you're trying to start a new fad? Somehow I doubt sweat patches are going to catch on anytime soon. Sakura blushed, trying unsuccessfully to cover the dark stains on her dress as her glare increased tenfold. Shut it, Piggy. I never noticed before how gray your bandages are. Weren't they white when we arrived? Ino growled at the slightly younger girl. They still are, Sweatpatch. You just need to get your eyes checked. Maybe that massive ridge above them is putting too much pressure on them, monkey girl? What did you say, pig? You head me, monkey. Pig, monkey, pig, monkey. The others sighed at the squabbling teens, having been subjected to the same thing for well over a month now. Think we can pack them into one of these crates and have them shipped to some far-off country before the senseis come back? Kiba whispered to his teammate, Tenten. The bun-haired brunette giggled and shook her head. No, Kurenai-sensei and Asuma-sensei would notice before we manage to get them out of here. Maybe they won't care? Kiba suggested with raised brows. Tenten laughed, picking up another couple of trays. I doubt it. Even if they didn't, the Hokage would have their heads for allowing their students to mail their teammates to some foreign land. Oh well, at least we can always dream. Kiba sighed regretfully as he too picked up more trays. Tenten patted the Inuzuka on the shoulder as she hauled the heavy trays over to the cooling chests. Tenten was one proud girl. Not only was she this year's top kunoichi, but after checking, she discovered that she was also more skilled than any of the kunoichi in the year above her. If they were anything like her female classmates, however, she couldn't really count that as a victory. Out of all the girls in her class, she was the only one who really applied herself to her dream of becoming a strong kunoichi. Oh, Hinata tried of course, but her lack of self-confidence always held her back from being truly strong. She was sure that if the shy Hyuga one day managed to grow a backbone, she'd be a force to be reckoned with. Ino and Sakura on the other hand. To put it simply, they were little more than civilians with access to chakra. They didn't seem to even want to be ninja, instead they focused all their attentions on Tenten's other teammate, Uchiha Sasuke. Their every action revolved around getting the Uchiha survivor to notice them, usually ending with the two of them fighting and the others with painful headaches. She and they didn't really get along. It was probably because she had called them disgraces to the title of kunoichi. Or maybe because, unlike them and nearly every other girl in their age group, she didn't bow at the altar of the great and powerful Uchiha Sasuke. Okay, so he was strong, she would admit. He wouldn't be the rookie of the year if he wasn't. And she supposed he could be considered handsome by modern standards, but she just couldn't see it. As far as she was concerned, he was her strong, moody, rather egotistical teammate. Strong? Yes. Potential to be great? Probably. Potential as a boyfriend? Not a chance. She smiled at Kiba's little partner Akamaru as it jumped around her, yipping happily. She was a sucker for puppies and Akamaru was a little cutie despite being a strong and fearsome nin dog. Having fun, boy? She asked, smiling as the little pup barked his agreement. It shouldn't be too long now, then we can leave and get something to eat. Maybe you can get some more bacon if Kiba says yes. The little white dog's tail beat back and forth in his excitement and he shot off like the canine equivalent of a rocket, most likely off to plead his case to Kiba for their desperate need to buy bacon after their mission was over. She glanced around. Ino and Sakura were still arguing, Kiba was listening to an exuberant Akamaru. The others were probably still outside and the senseis were off doing whatever it was they did when the mission their team was performing was too boring for their tastes. Only a few trays remained to be loaded, she saw. Just a little longer and ah! A high-pitched scream cut through the air like a knife. Tenten's head snapped around and she saw Sakura lying on the floor, the trays she was carrying scattered across the concrete. Ino stood off to one side, hands clasped over her mouth, and they watched in horror as one of the heavier wooden crates began to topple over from the top of the pile it was on. Sakura, look out! Tenten screamed, but for the life of her, she couldn't move. She could only watch, spellbound, as the heavy block of wood slipped over the edge, plummeting towards the still screaming girl below in slow motion. Tenten shut her eyes, unable to do anything else. She knew that even if she could move, she wasn't strong enough to stop the crate or quick enough to get Sakura out before it crushed them both. Her heart pounding in her chest, she tried to will herself temporarily deaf, unable to bear the girl's terrified screams. Suddenly there was a bang, a grunt, and Sakura's screams cut off abruptly. Trembling all over, Tenten slowly forced her eyes open fully, expecting to see red creeping out from under a wrecked crate, but what she did see took her breath away. Standing above Sakura protectively, legs spread and braced to compensate for the great load, was a red-headed girl who had actually managed to catch the crate on her shoulders, her arms gripping the sides to keep it steady. The girl's face looked a little strained as she struggled to keep the heavy crate from tumbling from her grip and onto the pink-haired teen who just stared at her savior in dumbfounded amazement. It was then that Tenten realized the redhead was shaking slightly. Looking at her feet, she realized what was wrong. The impact had knocked her stance wide and the weight of the crate was now forcing her legs apart even as the teen struggled to keep them together. Snapping out of her stupor, Tenten rushed to the girl, as did Kiba. Together, The two managed to maneuver the crate off the girl's shoulders and onto the ground just as the foreman came running over, followed by a few of his workers. "What the hell happened? Are you kids okay?" "We're fine, Togori-san," Tenten assured him somewhat shakily after the incident. "What happened?" Tenten turned to the pink-haired girl. "Sakura? What happened?" Sakura blinked, and when she answered her voice was extremely uneven, as if she were ready to burst into tears at any moment. I was talking to Ino when suddenly something smashed into the ground right beside me. It startled me and I fell over, and that's when the crate tipped over. I thought I was going to die. As soon as the word left her mouth, she became overcome with tears. Ino sank to her former best friend's side and wrapped her into a hug. Just because they weren't as close as they used to be didn't mean she didn't still care. "Togori," one of the workers said, handing the beefy man something he picked up from the floor. Togori peered at it, turning the twisted metal object over in his hands. "It's a buckle from a restraint belt," he explained. He looked up and sure enough, the strap that held the crate to the pile had snapped. Damn thing must have broken off and caused the crate to fall. "I swear, I'm gonna tear those damn suppliers a new one over this," he growled. Shaking his head, he looked at the kids. What happened next? The crate had just fallen over and was about to hit Sakura when she somehow managed to catch it. Tenten said, pointing to the strange redhead, unable to keep the disbelief out of her voice entirely. "Hey, Uzumaki, you alright?" Togori asked the girl, concerned. "I'm fine, Togori-san." She grimaced a bit as she rolled her shoulder. "I probably bruised my shoulder, but beyond that I'm okay." Just bruised her shoulder. Something that heavy should have snapped her spine in half. Tenten thought incuriously. "Here, kid, take this and take the rest of the day off," Togori said, breaking her out of her thoughts as he fished about in his pockets for something. He withdrew a wad of bills and the genin's jaws dropped. That was as much money as all three genin teams together were getting paid for this D rank. The girl took the money and gave it a quick once-over before her face fell into a confused frown. "There must be some mistake, Togori-san. This is double the price we agreed on. I can't take this." The large fishmonger just waved off her protests. "You earned it. Not only did you finish early, but you saved the girl's life. If she had died, it could have put the company in jeopardy and put a lot of good people out of work. Hell, you even managed to keep the crate in one piece." He laughed. Naruko shrugged and stuffed the money into her pocket. If someone wanted to be generous, she wasn't about to refuse them. "Thank you, Togori-san. Let me know if you need more work done." She gave a small bow, then turned from the group to leave through the back when Sakura's shy voice spoke up. Wait." Naruko paused and glanced over her shoulder at the younger girl who looked up at her through tear-filled eyes. "I just wanted to thank you. You saved my life." "Thank you. Don't mention it," Naruko said simply, and then she was gone. The genin watched her leave, and when she was out of sight, Togori spoke up, getting the ninja's attention. "Why don't you kids take a break for a while? And don't worry about the trays that were dropped, it won't affect your pay," he said kindly. "Thank you, Togori-san, we appreciate it," Tenten said for them, giving the man a short bow of thanks. They walked over to a small corner which served as a small break area for the workers, consisting of nothing more than a few chairs around a makeshift table built from a small crate and a piece of wood. They each grabbed a seat, Ino keeping an arm wrapped around a still shaky Sakura's shoulders. Kiba, in a rare moment of understanding, fetched them each a glass of water from the water cooler and set them down on the table, receiving a nod of thanks from each girl. They were silent for a while before Ino asked, "Are you okay, Sakura?" The girl gave a nod and a sniffle. "Yeah, but I can't stop shaking. I just can't get the image of that crate falling towards me out of my head. I was so sure that I was going to die." Her voice wavered and Ino gave her a reassuring squeeze. "We're lucky that girl was here," Ino said. "What I want to know was how the hell she managed to catch that crate." Tenten said, remembering how the crate seemed even heavier when she helped get it off the strange girl's shoulders, and even then she was sure the mysterious redhead had borne most of the weight. That thing should have crushed her. Sakura gave a small sob and Tenten realized her mistake. "Crap, sorry, Sakura." The pink-haired genin just waved it off. "It's okay. I'm actually curious as well. She seemed way too strong to be a civilian, but she wasn't wearing a Hite-8 and we're the only genin teams working here today. Maybe she was a chunin who doesn't like to wear her Hite-8." Kiba offered. Akamaru barked in agreement. Tenten shook her head. No. She can't have been more than a year older than we are, and I checked the scores from last year's graduates and none of the kunoichi had a chance of making Chunin within a year of leaving the academy, if ever. They fell silent for a long while, each lost in their own thoughts. They didn't know how long it was before a voice brought them back to earth. Why are you sitting down? Are you finished already? They looked up to see the sensei of Team 7, Hitaki Kakashi, walking towards them, one hand in his pocket and the other clutching his favorite smut. Behind him were the other senseis, Yuichi Kurenai and Sarutobi Asuma, as well as the other members of Teams 7 and 8 as well as Team 10. Kakashi-sensei, Tenten said, acknowledging her squad leader. We were just taking a break. There was an accident. Accident? Kurenai asked, one fine black eyebrow rising in confusion. What kind of accident? One of the restraint buckles holding a crate to the top of one of the piles snapped. Kiba told them. The buckle nearly hit Sakura and she fell just as the crate tipped over the edge right above her. Are you okay? Kurenai asked her student. Sakura nodded. Yes, sensei. The crate was just about hit me when somebody stopped it. Somebody stopped the crate? One of those crates? Asuma asked disbelievingly, pointing at the pile of large boxes. He doubted anyone below an elite Chunin would have been able to stop something that heavy in a freefall, and even then they'd have trouble, even with chakra. The girl nodded. Yeah, pretty easily too. The weird thing is I don't think she was even a ninja. Are you sure? Kakashi asked, intrigued. I doubt a civilian would have been strong enough to even lift something that heavy. What was this person's name? Uzigaki, I think. No. Tenten shook her head. Togori-san called her Uzumaki. The three Junin did a double take at the name. Did you say Uzumaki? Kakashi asked, actually tucking his book away for once. The genin nodded. Kakashi glanced at his colleagues who looked equally surprised at the news. Sensei? Something wrong? Tenten asked, seeing their looks. No, nothing, Kakashi said absent-mindedly. Turning his full attention back to the genin, he asked, this girl, what did she look like? Kiba took this one. She had short red hair, high cheekbones, light blue eyes. 3 weird marks on her cheeks, kinda like whiskers. Let's see, she was tall. About Shino's height, I guess. Oh, she had a great figure and a huge pair of Kiba, snapped Kurenai, Tenten, Sakura and Ino, causing the young Inuzuka to flinch back, realizing he'd said too much. Sorry, pervert, Tenten muttered, shaking her head at him. During all of this, Kakashi had been in deep thought. By the sound of it, this was the same Uzumaki that the Kyuubi had been sealed into and the same girl who went missing from her orphanage 10 years prior. When her disappearance was discovered, the Hokage had ordered a search for her, but in a village the size of Konoha and the size of the child in question the search turned up nothing. The Sandaime couldn't have committed too many ninja to the search since it would have stretched their forces too much. There had been rumors of course, but they were too sparse and spread out for anything definite. We should tell Hokage-sama about this. Well, he said, getting everyone's attention. We're almost done here. Let's get the rest of the supplies packed away, then go back to the Hokage's office. Grumbling slightly, the genin got up to finish their mission. Naruko shut the door behind her, absent-mindedly slipping the metal bar that made up the lock back into place, sealing the door. She slid off her hat and jacket and hung them on 2 of the bent nails that passed for coat hooks before kicking off her shoes, placing them beside the door, then walking into her home. For a derelict, handmade abode, the shack was pretty well stocked. The bare wooden floors were covered by numerous different cuts from an assortment of different carpets, creating a sort of giant collage on her floor, and the walls were bare wood but kept the cold out pretty well. The biggest room, the one she had just entered, was the living room. An old couch that had seen better days sat slouched in the middle of the room, and behind that was a stack of shelves that she herself had made. It was stocked with a few books she managed to borrow from the library or had found, as well as some of her very few trinkets. A small table she had found in the back garden served as a centerpiece for the room. She didn't know who built the shack or why, but whoever did was knowledgeable. They had managed to divert power, gas and water from the apartments below her and redirect them to include the shack. Something invaluable to a homeless person, especially during the colder times of year. In one corner of the living room was a small section which had been converted to serve as a kitchenette, consisting of a fridge freezer and an oven with a few ramshackle cabinets and a counter. It had taken a lot of cleaning for them both to be considered usable, and while she wasn't totally convinced that the oven wouldn't one day blow up in her face, it served its purpose. One door led off to her bedroom and another opened into a small room that had been renovated as a bathroom. A single small window allowed light into the room and a bare bulb hung from the ceiling. Her steps resounded off the floorboards as she walked across the door to the bathroom and she pushed it open. It was a little cramped but had a toilet, a sink and a shower, so she didn't care. She turned the tap in the shower and the shack's old scavenged pipes gurgled loudly before a torrent of water erupted from the showerhead, quickly filling the room with steam. She peeled off her tank top and slid out of her pants and underwear before standing naked to the world. Stepping under the spray, she grabbed the small bar of soap that was nearing the end of its life and began to build up a good lather. She tilted her head back, allowing the spray to cascade over her face and down her neck as she rubbed the soap into her skin. The hot water was gently soothing the ache in her shoulder, a memento from the falling crate. Raising one arm, she slid her soapy hand down her side before sliding up and massaging into the curve of her neck, rubbing the stress of the day away. When she was done, she grabbed the shampoo, a cheap brand but one that had a scent that appealed to her, and gently began to rub it into her scalp, enjoying the soothing feeling. It wasn't long before that too was done and Naruko stayed under the pounding spray for a few more minutes, indulging in one of her few pleasures. When she was finished, she cut off the spray and stepped out of the stall before grabbing a threadbare towel and rubbing off the moisture that coated her skin in a glistening sheen before walking to her room, unabashed in her state of undress. It wasn't like anyone was going to visit and walk in unannounced and see her. A small, single-person bed, a tiny bedside table, a battered cupboard and a chest of drawers made up her sleeping quarters, the only other window in the tiny home covered by a thin rag that made do as a curtain. She pulled the squeaky doors of the cupboard open and reached in to gently pull out one of her very few treasures. A thin robe of dazzling blue silk slid through her fingers like water. Its ridiculously smooth material was painted in a beautiful depiction of rolling waves crashing before a snow-topped mountain under a setting sun, its rays blending from orange and yellow to the blue of the rest of the robe. While Naruko wasn't one for pretty things, the robe was by far her favorite and most expensive possession. She had received it after delivering a load of them to one of the stores in town. The owner, a newcomer to the village, had noticed that the supplier had sent her more than she had ordered, and since she didn't need these extras nor did she need to pay for them, the kind woman had given one to Naruko as thanks for delivering the goods. That same lady had been one of the few to have even been graced by Naruko's rare smile. Naruko slid into the expensive garment and cinked it at the waist with its delicate belt before strolling into the living room. She picked one of her few books from the shelves, Silvered Mirrors by Tsukara Himori, and settled into the sagging cushions of her sofa with a soft sigh. Opening the slightly dog-eared book to where she had marked it last, Naruko began to read. So Naruko's still alive. Kakashi, Kurenai and Asuma stood in the Hokage's office. Their teams had returned to collect their pay, but the Junin had stayed behind to inform their leader of what their students had told them. The Sandame stood before the window now, his pipe smoking as he gazed out towards the village he spent his entire life protecting. It seems so, Kakashi said quietly. Sarutobi was silent for a long while. How did she look? We didn't see her ourselves, but Kiba commented that she seemed healthy. Kurenai said, causing Kakashi and Asuma to chuckle at her skirting of Kiba's perverted comments. Sarutobi gave a gravely, of thought as he once more lapsed into silence. After a long time, he asked, and you say she stopped a fully laden crate from crushing Sakura? By herself? Asuma nodded even if his dad couldn't see it. Yeah, that's what the kids say. And did you sense its chakra at any time? The three Junin shook their heads, each with a, no. I wasn't really looking, but I would have sensed its chakra if it was used. What about you two? Did you sense anything? Kakashi asked his fellow teachers. No, Kurenai said. Me neither. Asuma piped up. Sarutobi thought for a few minutes before asking, did you ask Togori-san about her? We did, unofficially, Kakashi said cryptically. What did he say? The Hokage asked, understanding that the fishmonger wanted digression with the topic. It seems that Naruko is quite famous with the merchants. She takes any old odd job available, be it physical labor, a need for a courier or administrative work. Basically, if someone needs some help, they go to Naruko. A lot of merchants have done business with her at one point or another. Kurenai informed her leader. Taking a large puff of his pipe, Sarutobi slowly blew the smoke from his nostrils. He glanced towards the portraits of the past Hokage, settling on one in particular before sighing and lowering himself into his padded leather chair. He drummed his fingers on the table before his eyes settled on Kakashi. You say 2 of your students saw Naruko with their own eyes? Kakashi nodded. Sarutobi reached over to a pile of blank scrolls before pulling one out and grabbing his ornate fountain pen. He scribbled something down for a minute before grabbing his rubber stamp and applying his seal of approval with a dull bang. He then rolled up the scroll before tossing it to Kakashi, who caught it easily. I am assigning you and your team a mission. It's classed as D rank but with C rank pay. I want you to search the village and see if you can find Naruko again. Kakashi looked at the scroll in his hand for a minute, seemingly in thought, before asking, May I ask why you want us to find her, sir? Sarutobi thought about it for a moment before deciding that disclosure would be best in this case. There are things I need to talk to Naruko about. Matters pertaining to her safety. Her safety? Asuma asked. The Sarutobi head leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Jiraiya contacted me. As you may or may not know, he has established a network of information contacts throughout the different countries. He told me that a group calling themselves Akatsuki have been making discreet inquiries. They've been asking about the Biju, specifically their Jinchuriki, who they are, where they can be found and what skills they possess. We don't know why they're asking about Jinchuriki, but neither of us believe it is just a case of natural curiosity. Jiraiya is looking for more information, but it's been proving hard to come by. This Akatsuki is extremely careful about making sure they leave no traces of themselves behind. We haven't even gotten a description of any of their members. If I am correct and Akatsuki is going to try and capture the Jinchuriki, then we need to be prepared. Naruko needs to be prepared. But how? Kurenai asked after a long stretch of silence. Prepared in what way? I have several options, but I want to run them by Naruko before anything is decided. Sarutobi explained. Team 7 will find her, Hokage-sama. Kakashi said confidently as he tucked the scroll containing their orders into his vest pocket. Good. I want daily updates. Dismissed. The next morning, Tenten sat on the railing of the bridge that served as Team 7's usual meeting spot, idly swinging her legs over the side, gazing down at her reflection in the water below as she waited for the rest of her team to arrive. She didn't have to wait long before she saw Kiba coming along the road, Akamaru trotting along at his feet. He looked a little ruffled, as he always did in the mornings. "M'ernan," he tried to say through a jaw-cracking yawn. "Late night?" Tenten asked him as he crossed his arms on the railing, laying his head on them. "Hannah," Kiba grumbled, referring to his older sister. She had a few of her friends over last night. They were drinking pretty hard and had the stereo on full blast most of the night. Didn't get to sleep until 5 a.m. Tenten grimaced in sympathy. "Why didn't you ask your mom to tell her to keep it down?" Kiba snorted. "Who do you think supplied the booze? She was one of the loudest ones there." Tenten burst out laughing at the disgruntled look on the teen's face and ruffled his hair, gaining an irritated huff from him. "One day you'll be hosting parties and being the noisy one in the family, little Kiba." "Little?" Kiba asked incredulously but playfully. "I'll have you know, Panda-chan, that there is absolutely nothing little about me." "I highly doubt that, Dobi." Kiba growled and spun just as their last teammate, Uchiha Sasuke, came strolling onto the bridge, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "What did you call me, you moody bastard?" Kiba shouted, baring his fangs. Sasuke just scoffed at the feral boy. "No wonder you're the dead last, you can't even understand Japanese." Kiba growled. "I understand that you're begging for someone to kick your ass." Sasuke smirked, further angering the other boy. "You couldn't in the academy. What makes you think you could now? Guys, do we have to do this every day?" Tenten sighed. For the last month since they had become a team, the two boys had never said a civil thing to one another, instead bickering as much Sakura and Ino do. Well, almost as much. Whatever the boys would have said was drowned out by a puff of smoke popping into existence right beside Tenten, nearly causing her to fall into the stream. "Yo!" Kakashi greeted his team with a wave from where he was crouched on the railing. "Don't do that!" Tenten screamed in frustration, one hand over her racing heart. Every day since they became a team, her sensei liked to appear right beside her in the morning, nearly causing her to jump out of her skin every time. Sorry. Kakashi apologized, but the grin on his face told her that he was anything but jackass. Before his weapon-wielding student could attempt to skin him alive, Kakashi pulled a scroll from his vest. We have a mission, he told them, becoming slightly more serious. This one comes straight from the Hokage. It's listed as D rank, but you'll receive C rank pay upon its completion. What's the mission? Tenten asked, intrigued. If the Hokage had authorized the mission himself and was paying them C rank pay, then it must be important. We need to find someone. Specifically, we need to find the girl you met at Tagiri's fishmonger's yesterday. The one that saved Sakura? Kiba asked, surprised. Why? Her name's Uzumaki Naruko. Kakashi explained. 10 years ago, she went missing from the orphanage she grew up in and has been off the radar since. The Hokage wants us to find her, then report back to him. Why? What's so important about one homeless orphan girl? Sasuke asked, confused. Kakashi shrugged nonchalantly. The reasons are personal, but that doesn't matter. We've been ordered to find her for the Hokage. This was a direct order from our supreme commander and we had to comply. Okay, so what's first? Kiba asked, ready to get on with it. Kakashi fished a small notebook from his vest and opened it to a blank page. First we need an image to go on. Tenten and Kiba, since you two actually talked with Naruko, we need you to help with the sketch. It took a little while, but before too long they had an accurate picture of Naruko to go on. Kakashi had all three of them memorize it, and when he was sure they wouldn't forget, he bit his thumb before running through a small chain of hand seals. Kachiyose no Jutsu. There was another burst of smoke, except this time 3 nin dogs appeared before Kakashi, each wearing Konoha ninja paraphernalia. Yo, Kakashi, long time no see. The smallest dog, a little pug, said, its paw raised in greeting. Hey, Pakun. Kakashi nodded back. Turning to his students, he told them, these are my summons. Guys, I want you to go with my students. We're trying to find a girl and your noses will be a big help. Do you think you can help me? Sure. Pakun nodded before walking over to Tenten. Hey, name's Pakun. Hello, Pakun-san. Call me Tenten. She smiled back, a little bemused at talking with a dog. The dog that went over to Kiba gave him a small yap of greetings, but Akamaru didn't seem too approving of this newcomer muscling its way into his territory. He seemed to calm slightly after the summon barked a few things to him and the dogs got on well from there on. Sasuke accepted his companion without a word. Alright. Intelligence we gained says that Naruko is well known by the merchants in the village. She performs any odd jobs that are going, so she may be working today. You could also try the parks, markets, stores or places like that. Tenten said Naruko mentioned she hurt her shoulder yesterday, so I'm going to check out the hospital and see if she went there at any point. If you find her, send your summon to come fetch me and keep on Naruko. We only need to find her, so under no circumstances try to restrain her or bring her in. Other than that, just be careful. Kakashi seemed to be looking at Sasuke as he mentioned the no apprehending rule. The Uchiha child scoffed. How dangerous can she be? She did catch a half-ton crate by herself yesterday, and with little effort I might add. Tenten pointed out. Sasuke just HN'd and crossed his arms. Okay, we'll search for a few hours, and if we don't find anything we'll call it a day and try again tomorrow. Dismissed. With that, Kakashi vanished in a burst of smoke as the 3 genin and their animal companions split up to search the massive village for the wayward redhead. The first day had been a bust. It seemed that no one had seen or heard from Naruko at all that day, but there were those who had heard of her. Most were merchants who had only good things to say about the girl. While it seemed that they didn't know her from a personal standpoint, they did say that her work ethic was admirable and each spoke reverently of her strength. They were a little wary of the ninja looking for the quiet, hard-working girl and were hesitant to help, fearing they could land her in trouble. Still, there were others, mostly civilians the genin had asked during moments of frustration, who didn't seem to care too much for the elusive redhead. When questioned, the villager in question would frown, give a curt denial of knowing the girl and left without another word. The genin thought this strange but didn't pursue it. They looked all over the village for any sign of the Uzumaki girl but found nothing. It was a weary and tired group of teens that were dismissed from the Hokage's office later that night after giving their reports. They each split up without a word, each desiring nothing more than a hot meal and a comfy bed for the night. Tomorrow the search would continue. The next day Naruko was sitting outside a small convenience store with a ragged-looking backpack sitting at her feet as she waited. It wasn't long before she saw the store's elderly owner shuffle out with a large pile of forms in his hands and she stood to meet him. "Ah, Naruko-chan," the old man said when he saw her. He seemed lost for a moment before asking, "Why are you here again?" "You hired me to deliver order forms to the merchants at the warehouses, Doka-san." Naruko reminded him, used to the old man's failing memory by now. "Ah yes," the man exclaimed. He handed her the forms. "I need you to deliver these to the merchants at the warehouses so I can get my new stock." She tucked the forms into her backpack and zipped it shut. "I understand, Doka-san." Good, good." The shopkeeper nodded before his eyes scrunched in confusion as he peered at the girl. "Who are you again?" "I'm Naruko, Doka-san. You hired me to deliver your order forms." "Well, what are you still doing here?" he asked her, waving her away before shaking his head and shuffling back into his store muttering, "Kids these days. So lazy. Had to beat them with a stick to get them to do anything." Naruko ignored the elderly man and turned to run down the street. She slipped between the milling villagers, swerving around stalls and the occasional carriage as she made her way through the village. She used her extensive knowledge of the village's back streets to cut down on her time. While she wasn't on the level of a ninja when it came to traveling, she had developed a habit of free running when she was in a hurry. She easily scaled a chain fence before leaping off it and landing on a trash can which she used to springboard herself out of the alley, neatly jumping over the wheelbarrow full of watermelons that had been in the way, before passing over a small fence that cordoned off one of Konoha's many parks. She cut between the trees, her feet kicking up a trail of leaves in her wake, the whooshing sound of the passing trees filling her ears like the hissing of angry snakes. Skipping over a fallen tree, she broke the tree line and passed the joggers on the concrete path that wormed through the park, passing them with more speed than any civilian should possess. As she approached the opposite fence to the other side of the village, she brought her hands forward and used them to flip herself over the railing before continuing on, never once faltering in her pace when she noticed a problem. The streets ahead of her were packed. It would take a while to get through there. Suddenly her sharp eyes spotted a stack of crates piled up at the side of a low building. Making up her mind, she altered her course and ran up the stack before jumping and grabbing hold of the edge of the roof. She pulled herself up and took off once more. There were no gaps between the buildings and they were roughly the same height, so it was no problem for the nimble civilian to traverse them. As she leapt from the post office to Ruki's curtains, she glanced over the skyline. Dominating the scene was the Hokage monument, the Hokage tower and the hospital. In the distance she could see ninja pouncing from building to building, faster and farther than she could. She'd have to get down before they saw her. Civilians weren't allowed on the roofs. She continued on for nearly 10 minutes before the large warehouses came into sight and she dropped down from the roofs, crouching to absorb the impact. She slowed her pace, nodding to the guards at the gates before continuing on into the hustle and bustle of the warehouse district. Forklifts carried heavy loads between the buildings and dozens of workers lifted supplies out onto waiting carts, shouted instructions to each other or sat in a group, talking as they ate their lunches. Naruko dropped off the first batch of order forms to Sarimo's fruit market before continuing on to stop at Takaderi, Tagiri's fishmongers and Old Hariku's distillery. By the time they were all delivered it was well past noon. Naruko stopped at Doka's store to collect her pay, which took a while thanks to the aging man's failing memory. Thankfully his wife was there to help. "Thank you, Doka-san." She gave a small bow. "Call on me again if you need any help." She bought a few necessities like soap and shampoo with her newly earned cash and left. A few minutes later a raven-haired teen with the Uchiha fan stitched onto the back of his shirt entered and asked the old owner if he'd ever seen anyone named Uzumaki Naruko. Doka couldn't remember ever hearing that name and Uchiha Sasuke left the store, becoming rather agitated with this pointless mission. Maeda Guy sighed as he led 2/3 of his team into the Hokage Tower after their latest mission. The objective was to lead their client from a small village near the border with Kusa and escort him and his family to the shoreline where they would board a ship to carry them across the water to Kumo. However, while en route they were ambushed by a large gang of bandits. While ordinarily bandits were no match for ninja, there was the matter that the single female element of their team didn't fully commit herself to training as much as her teammates. She ended up with some serious injuries from the battle, and as a result they had to send for replacements to continue on with the mission while they got her back to Konoha to receive treatment. As a result they had forfeit their pay. The money was not too big of an issue, but the idea of having to hand over their mission to someone else to complete was never something a ninja liked doing. He sighed again. He'd have to talk with the Hokage about yet another replacement. Hokage-sama will see you now, Guy-san. The young secretary said with a kind smile. Thank you, Miko-san. Guy gave a small bow of thanks and led his two healthy students past the Anbu guards and into the spacious office of the greatest warrior in Fire Country. Guy. Sarutobi greeted as Team Guy stood at attention before his desk. I hear one of your students was injured on your mission. What happened exactly? We were 3 days into the mission when the caravan was attacked by a group of bandits just as we were passing the Majan Mountains. With the numbers in the attack we believe they may have a base of operations in the area. They attacked simultaneously from either side of the road, leaping down from the trees, armed with spears, swords, clubs, the usual. We acted immediately with myself and Lee engaging them head-on while Neji and Hasuka defended the client and his family. With his Byakugan and Jukin, Neji managed to keep most of the bandits at bay but Hasuka. He sighed. Sir, she panicked and one of the enemy managed to get behind her and wound her with his dagger which was coated in poison. A kind of arachnid venom if I'm not mistaken. Once the battle was over I cleaned the wound as best I could but she was delirious from fever and it was clear she would only become more ill if left untreated. I sent a messenger hawk back to the village with a request for someone to relieve us and we returned to get Hasuka medical attention. He stood silent when he finished his story. Sarutobi sighed and leaned back in his chair as he took up his pipe. With a quick flick a match was lit and he held the flame to the dried leaves in the end of the pipe as he puffed before snuffing out the match and tossing it into the wastebasket. I take it you want to suggest Hasuka be dropped from the program? Guy nodded, his face contrite. I'm afraid so. She just doesn't seem to have what it takes to be a ninja. Sarutobi nodded with a sigh. What does that make it? 5 replacements? Guy nodded, shamefaced. Don't beat yourself up about it, Guy, none of this is your fault. It's better that we drop them now than you having to visit their parents and explain how their child died on a mission. If they don't have what it takes then they should forget about being a ninja. He shook his head. I'll visit Hasuka and her parents later on. Our biggest problem will be finding her replacement. The Kunoichi scores from last year are among the lowest we've ever seen. At this rate we're going to have to start looking at students who passed in other years but are still waiting for placement. Go get some rest, all of you. I'll summon you when I've got something. Guy nodded and led his team out of the Hokage tower where he turned to them. Go home and meet me tomorrow at our training grounds. It's about the only thing we can do without a 4th teammate. Hi, Guy-sensei, they said as they split off, each heading in different directions towards their homes. With a sigh, Guy turned towards his own secluded training spot, feeling the need to work off some of his frustration. When, he wondered, would his team ever be complete? This is pointless. Sasuke finally said. He and his team were currently walking towards the warehouse district in search of any clue as to where they could find their target. It was currently the 4th consecutive day of searching and they had yet to find anything that would lead them to the girl. We've been looking all over for this girl and we still haven't found anything. We should be training or going on a mission, not looking for some lowlife. We are on a mission, Sasuke. Kakashi reminded him, not looking up from his book. I meant a real mission. Sasuke replied, annoyed. Hokage-sama issued it to us so that makes it a real mission. Enough whining, we need to be on the lookout for any sign of her. Said Kakashi. He tucked away his book and turned to his team. I'm going to check in at the gatehouses and see if anyone matching Naruko's description left the village in the last few days. You 3 continue on towards the warehouse district and take another look around. With that he vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving his 3 students alone. When they arrived at the warehouses, they began to go through the same routine they had for the last 4 days. They asked people if they knew Naruko, if they had seen her in the past few days, if they knew where she lived. Sadly no one seemed to know anything about Naruko other than that she was a good worker. Either that or they were being deliberately uncooperative in order to protect her, even when the ninja assured them that she was in no trouble. If you don't know where to find her then how do you call her when you have work for her? Tenten challenged one foreman. The girl just knows when she's needed. He said cryptically and walked off. Tenten groaned in annoyance and frustration and flopped down onto a pile of timber as Sasuke and Kiba walked up to her, equal looks of defeat on their faces. They plopped down beside her and they silently watched the workers filter by, each lost in their own thoughts. Currently, Tenten was thinking about their target. How can it be so hard to find one person? Even in a village the size of Konoha, someone must have seen her. Red is a pretty rare hair color here, and how many people have 3 whisker marks on each cheek? She's apparently well known by the merchants, but no one will help us find her. Arg, this is annoying the hell out of me. Where is this girl? She's not registered as renting any apartments, none of the other homeless know her and none of the shelters have ever seen her come in. Where would a homeless girl live where she's seen by no one? Does she even have a set place to sleep, or does she just sleep where she lays down for the night? Wait, there are plenty of shady apartment buildings in this village and I'll bet that not all of them keep up-to-date records. She could even be living under a false name. She mentally groaned. We'll never find her at this rate. Why does Hokage-sama care so much about finding this one person anyway? She sighed, rubbing her temples. Let's go ask at the military police headquarters, maybe they have a file on her. The other 2 grunted and followed her towards the main building of the city police force. Sadly, that too was a bust. The ninja at the front desk checked the database and they had never arrested anyone named Uzumaki Naruto, nor had she ever been connected to a crime or filed any charges with them. The genin left the building, their hopes at an all-time low. Now they sat on a bench in one of Konoha's many parks, gazing out across the pond where many others congregated, enjoying the summer sun. Tenten lazily tossed bits of a ration bar for the ducks while Kiba petted a snoozing Akamaru while the pup lay on his lap. Sasuke just sat staring into space. Tenten sighed, her head lolling back to look up at the clear blue sky. That's it, I give up. We'll never find her. We need to. Kiba grumbled. It reflects badly on us to abandon a mission. We just have to keep looking. Tenten covered her face with both hands and screamed with frustration before removing her hands and shouting to the sky. Does anyone know where the hell we can find Uzumaki Naruko? Did you say Uzumaki? The 3 genin spun in their seats to see a large man with a black mustache wearing the dark green jumpsuit that all environmental control workers had to wear, luminescent silver strips running around their wrists and chests so that people could see them if they were ever working at night or in the sewers. Yes, we're looking for her. Do you know where we can find her? Tenten asked, barely able to keep her excitement in check. After days of fruitless searching they might finally have a lead. No, the man shook his head. The genin sagged over the bench. They didn't know whether to cry or scream. It was hopeless. But I know where she'll be. Or maybe not. The ninja looked up at the man, their looks half curious, half pleading. Where? Sasuke all but demanded. Why are you looking for her? The man asked, folding his arms across his chest. Please, sir, the Hokage himself issued us with a mission to find Uzumaki Naruko. We've been looking for days and still can't find her. Tenten said diplomatically, seeing that Kiba was ready to tear into the man. HMPH. The man snorted. Maybe the Hokage will finally do something about that wretched little menace. Menace? Tenten asked. Nobody ever said anything about that. Yeah, menace. That girl is nothing but trouble. I should know. The little bitch ruined my life. What do you mean? Kiba asked. I used to own a stall in the fruit market, a pretty successful one too. My goods were some of the best money could buy. One day I was minding my own business when all of a sudden someone wearing a pretty fancy cloak shows up. Here's me thinking, looky here. A brand new rich customer all for me. I was about to make a sales pitch when the person underneath the cloak looked up at me and wouldn't you know it, it's that damn Uzumaki bitch. Then the little slip of a girl holds up one of my own bags of apples and there was a rip in the netting. Before I could tear her a new one, she starts ranting and raving for all the market to hear, saying that she was a servant from some noble's house and that she bought the apples from me earlier that day for a dinner party and that one of the guests found a fully grown worm in one of the apple cores. Utter shit. She tosses the bag in me, turns around and leaves, leaving me standing there with a half-empty bag of apples and a stall full of fruit that no one will buy. By the end of the week word had spread and suddenly everyone acted like my stall was invisible. I had to sell my space, toss perfectly good stock in the trash and take this crappy job. In 5 minutes I went from one of the most successful stall owners in the market to a fucking river cleaner, all because of Uzumaki Naruko. The man was pacing by the end of his rant, his face an angry red. Wait, why would she do that? Tenten asked, confused. Because she's been nothing but trouble since the day she was born. The man said irritably. I swear, no wonder she's an orphan. Her parents probably knew what a little monster she was and just tossed her into the streets. I wouldn't blame them if they did. Tenten frowned at that. There were things that didn't add up, but she chose not to pursue it for now. Can you tell us where to find her, sir? The man looked irritated. I just did. The market, every week like clockwork. Trust me, she'll be there. Thank you, sir, you've been a big help. Tenten thanked him and they watched as the man lumbered off across the park. All right, Kiba exclaimed in excitement. The marketplace. What day is it open again? Sunday. Tenten told him. My mom usually goes there and she used to take me with her when I was little. We should tell Kakashi, Sasuke said as he stood from the bench. It's Saturday today, so we tell him what we've found. Go get the girl tomorrow and then we can finally end this pointless mission. The other two shrugged and followed their teammate towards the gates to fetch their teacher. When Sunday finally arrived, Team 7 sat perched on the roofs surrounding the market, watching for the telltale shock of red hair of their target. They were each equipped with a headset for easy communication, and even Akamaru had a nin dog variation of the technology developed by the Inuzuka clan. Kakashi sat on top of a water tower while Tenten was hidden behind some crates on the building across from him. Sasuke was sat between vents in the roof of the building to his right and Kiba and Akamaru were lying on the flat roof to his left, theirs being the only building with no cover. All four sides of the square were covered. Do you see anything yet? Kakashi asked his students as his one visible eye scanned the crowd below him. Nothing here, came Tenten's reply over the headset. I don't see her. Sasuke's cool voice spoke back. I don't see her either. Kiba grumbled. They'd been here since the market opened at 4 a.m. That old man had better not have been lying to us. I doubt he did, Tenten said back. He seemed pretty agitated when we mentioned her name, plus he had no reason to lie. Yeah, well, all I know is my legs are beginning to fall asleep and we've yet to catch a glimpse of any redheads. The boy replied as he fidgeted, trying to increase the circulation in his legs. He sighed in frustration. When the hell is that girl? Wait. I think I see her. The entrance nearest the burger stand. Kakashi leaned forward to get a better look. He could see the red hair moving through the crowds but couldn't see the face clearly. I can't see her face from here. Kiba, Tenten, is that our girl? Tenten peered closer as she tried to see, but the person turned slightly which allowed her to see their face. Kakashi-sensei, that's her. That's definitely Uzumaki Naruko. Are you sure? Kakashi asked, still trying to see her face. Positive. She has the same short red hair and she's got the whisker marks too. Tenten's right, Kiba said. That's her. Akamaru gave a yip of agreement beside him. I'd know whether to agree or not if I could just see. Kakashi let out an inaudible gasp as the crowds parted enough to catch a glimpse of the person's face. My god, her face is a little more angular but she looks just like her mother. It was true. Looking at her now it was easy to see who her parents were. While Kushina's eyes had been large pools of ocean blue and Minato's had been narrowed and more of a darker blue, Naruko's looked like a perfect blend of the two, giving her a very feline look. Coupled with the smooth lines of her jaw, high cheekbones, slim neck, thin eyebrows and the famed Uzumaki red hair, Naruko was already a rare beauty. If this was an indication of things to come, then men from all over Fire Country and maybe even beyond would be falling over themselves for a chance to court the young lady. That's definitely her. There's no mistaking it, Kakashi muttered. Huh? What do you mean, Kakashi-sensei? Tenten asked, confused. Kakashi realized his mistake. Nothing, Tenten. Keep your eyes on her at all times and make sure to stay out of sight. We don't want to scare her. Our orders are to shadow her only. Kakashi discreetly bit his thumb and reached down to his side where he summoned Pakun. He turned to the little pug. Pakun, I need you to go to the Hokage and tell him we found Naruko. Sure thing. The dog nodded before racing away across the rooftops. Kakashi turned back to the market where Naruto was going from stall to stall, examining each of the wares in turn with the look of someone who knew what they wanted and would accept no substitute. She picked up some of the foodstuffs, looking at it closely, and if it passed her rigorous screening process, she then bought it and moved on, never buying more than one thing from any one stall. As she went about her business, Kakashi couldn't help but notice the way she moved. No, not in a perverted way. Naruko's entire demeanor simply screamed self-control. Her every twitch seemed to be carefully thought out and perfectly executed, and she seemed aware of everything within her immediate vicinity. Kakashi found this fascinating. Such behavior was usually only seen in the most experienced of Junin or sometimes in veteran samurai. For a civilian to be able to carry themselves with such complete control was amazing. What was even more amazing was the fact that he couldn't read her at all. Usually he could tell what people were thinking or feeling by the subtle twitch in their face or their body or their eyes, but Naruko gave away nothing. Her face was completely calm and controlled. The closest thing to an emotion she showed was the very slight downturn at the corners of her mouth. Not enough to be a full frown, but enough to show that she wasn't the pleasant or friendly type of calm. She was the, just get out of my way and leave me alone, calm. Guys, stay on her but don't let her know you're following her. Kakashi ordered as Naruko finished up her shopping and headed towards the exit. The four ninja leapt from rooftop to rooftop. Their eyes locked on the beautiful redhead making her way through the throngs of people. The genin in particular seemed to be watching her closer than was necessary. They'd been searching high and low for this girl for the better part of a week, and they weren't about to lose her now. They followed her through the village, the surroundings becoming more and more run down as they approached the less well-off sections of the village. This place had more litter, a few boarded-up windows, and even some shops of questionable innocence. Suddenly, Naruko turned off the main road and into a little side street mostly filled with boxes except for a little cafe called Nemu's Cafe. It was tiny and not the cleanest place but seemed nice enough. The ninja actually had to drop down from the rooftops and take shelter in the alley across the street from the cafe where they could see through the window without giving themselves away. Naruko walked up to the counter where a teenage girl who looked to be a few years older than her sat on a stool, reading a magazine as she absently blew her bubblegum. She looked up as Naruko approached. "A roll and scone, please," Naruko asked politely. The slightly older teen nodded and went to put her order together as Naruko took a seat at one of the small tables, setting her bag of groceries down at her side. She idly tapped her fingers on the wood as she waited. About 5 minutes later, the waitress arrived with her order, which she took with a nod of thanks before digging in. It was particularly tasty, Naruko thought. It was one of the reasons she liked this place, other than it being quiet, out of the way and tolerant of the fact that she ate there. As was her custom, she covered the scone in hot sauce. She always did have a taste for spicy things, the spicier the better. When she finished, she had just got up to the counter to pay when the door was kicked open. 3 burly men charged in, their faces covered by balaclavas, and in their hands were clutched wicked-looking knives. They spread out, with 2 covering the 2 or 3 patrons and the 3rd heading straight for the counter where the waitress was huddled, terrified. "Open that till and give us all the money, now," he barked, brandishing his knife at her. The near-hysterical girl scrambled to comply, her fingers shaking madly as she attempted to work the buttons on the register. After a few tries she finally managed to succeed and shoved the few notes that had been inside towards the robber, who stuffed them inside his coat pocket. The other 2 had been going for the customers, ordering them to empty their watches, wallets and jewelry into the bags they carried. "Oh ho!" one exclaimed when he reached Naruko, his eyes raking up and down her body. "Look what we have here. A cute little redhead all by her lonesome. How about it, baby, put your money in the bag like a nice little girl?" he asked, a smirk evident in his voice as he proffered the bag towards her. The other one, who had been harassing the customers, snorted from across the room. "Look at her clothes, idiot. I doubt she even has enough to pay for whatever it is she ate here." "That's no problem." The man smirked as he sauntered up to Naruko, who just stared at him impassively. Wrapping one arm around her tiny waist, he pulled her close, his knife teasing the tight fabric of her shirt that stretched between her s. "I'm sure we can work out some other kind of payment, can't we, sugar? I suggest you let me go," Naruko advised calmly, as if this were an everyday occurrence. The man tilted his head as if contemplating it before shaking his head. The hand around her waist slithered up until it cupped her through her thin t-shirt, which the robber enjoyed all the more when he realized she wasn't wearing a bra. "Nah, we're gonna have some fun tonight, Red." Naruko sighed resignedly. Her hand flashed up to wrap around the hand holding the knife, and she twisted under his arm. The man cried out as his face impacted the solid wood of the table with a loud thud, causing him to see stars as his arm was jerked so far behind his back that he feared it would be ripped out of its socket. He screamed in pain as Naruko grabbed his hair and pulled his head back so she could speak into his ear. "I did warn you." She slammed his head against the table, breaking his nose and knocking him out at the same time. "Hey!" Naruko looked up to see the other robber coming at her. She grabbed the empty sauce bottle from the table and launched it right at him, shattering the thick glass against his face. The man's legs flew out from underneath him and he fell to the floor, unconscious just as the third criminal came running forward from the counter. Naruko let go of the man she had pinned to the table and turned to meet the attack head-on as the large man brought his knife down in a reverse grip. In one fluent motion, Naruko's two hands wrapped around his wrist and she pulled him over into a perfect hip toss, slamming him into the tiled floor with enough force to make the entire cafe shake. Naruko brushed a strand of red hair behind her ear, turning to the young waitress who was peeking over the counter, tear streaks running down her face. "You should call Ninja in to apprehend these three." She laid her money on the counter, grabbed her groceries and left the cafe, not noticing the four ninja in the shadow of the alley across the street. Kakashi let go of Tenten and Kiba's arms. The two young ninja had attempted to rush the cafe when the three robbers started raiding the place. Technically, they should have acted the second the criminals started brandishing the knives, but Kakashi had wanted to see how Naruko could handle herself. If he was needed, he could have been in that cafe and laid out those three lowlifes in a second, but it appeared that his interference wasn't required. He thought so. A girl as good-looking as Naruko had to have learned to take care of herself living on the streets. And she took care of herself very well, it seemed, he noted with pride in his sensei's daughter. "Let's go," he told them, directing them towards the path Naruko took. "But what about those three?" Kiba asked, looking back at the cafe, talking about the criminals within. Poof! A clone appeared beside Kakashi and headed for the cafe. "Don't worry about them. Our mission is to shadow Naruko. Come on." They took to the roofs as they continued to follow Naruko further into the run-down section of the village. "Hey, Kakashi-sensei," Tenten called as they flew across the rooftops. "What happens next? Do we talk with this girl or what?" "Hokage-sama only ordered us to follow her, not engage her in any way," Kakashi answered, his eye not leaving Naruko's back. "So our mission is just to stalk this girl through the village?" Sasuke asked, quite annoyed. He hadn't been searching all over the village and talked with what had to be every single person in the village only to not meet the girl who demanded so much attention. "Your mission was to find her so that I may talk to her, Sasuke." The four ninjas stumbled ungracefully to a stop and turned to see Sarutobi Hiruzen standing atop a pole near them. The old man leapt off the pole and onto their roof silently. "Hokage-sama," Kakashi exclaimed, surprised. "I didn't even sense you coming." "Well, I do have some experience with sneaking around, Kakashi," Sarutobi replied with a smirk as the veteran Junin blushed, scratching the back of his head, embarrassed. "Of course, sir. I suppose you're here to talk with her?" Sarutobi nodded, surprising the genin. Usually if someone as important as the Hokage wanted to talk with someone, he'd summon them to his office. If he was taking time out of his busy schedule to come and meet someone at their home, or wherever it was that this homeless girl lived, it must have been important. "What are we waiting for then?" Kiba asked as he prepared to take off after Naruko again. The Hokage's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Sorry, Kiba, but this conversation is both extremely personal and classified," Sarutobi told the young Inuzuka with a smile. That surprised the three genin a great deal. What was so secret that the Hokage needed to talk about with a civilian that but was too important for ninja to hear? The mystery surrounding Uzumaki just became a whole lot more intriguing. "What? So we turned this village over searching for this girl and we don't even get to see how this whole thing ends?" Sasuke asked incredulously. "Sasuke," Kakashi barked but stopped when Sarutobi raised a hand, cutting him off. The older ninja turned to the last loyal Uchiha in the village. "Sasuke, there are many times when a mission doesn't go the way you want it to go. Sometimes it is simply an order to pull back, to let a suspect go, or even when orders to attack a target are given. This is one of those times. The things I need to talk to Naruko about are not only very personal but classified too. Plus I don't think she'd appreciate it much if she found out that ninja have been going around asking questions about her then following her home. The questions alone may hurt her chances of finding work given what she does for a living." Approaching her by myself would be best. Sarutobi said kindly but sternly, a leader giving his soldier an order. Sasuke backed down, but the scowl on his face told them he wasn't happy about it. Sarutobi looked at Kakashi. Come to my office tomorrow for the debriefing. I'd better catch up to Naruko before we lose her again. With that he vanished from the roof, leaving behind Kakashi with some rather let down students. Don't let it upset you. This is our job and you did it wonderfully. I think it's easy to say that this mission is a success. He said with a smile, trying to cheer them up. Yeah, we did kick ass with this mission, didn't we? Kiba said with a chuckle, his boasting breaking the mood like he intended. Tenten chuckled and smacked his shoulder lightly. Learn some modesty, you braggart. Ain't bragging if it's true, babe. He grinned, buffing his nails on his jacket. Kakashi shook his head with a fond smile at his two students. Let's break up for the day. We'll get in some training before the debriefing tomorrow, then get another mission. The team parted ways, but even though they had been a little appeased with not being able to see the mission through to the very end, they each had one question running through their minds. What was the mystery behind Uzumaki Naruko? Sarutobi shadowed the young redhead through the bad part of town, noting that she seemed completely at ease amidst the rougher edges of society. She eventually paused outside an alley beside an abandoned apartment building and glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Sarutobi actually had to scramble to hide when her eyes snapped up to the rooftops, not thinking a civilian would have mind enough to watch for ninja on the roofs. He had a moment of shock when she looked directly at the group of shadows he hid amongst, her icy eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the rooftop. Seemingly finding nothing out of the ordinary, she turned and vanished into the alley where she slid open a camouflaged door in the fence and disappeared into the courtyard behind the apartments, vanishing from his line of sight. Sarutobi leapt to an adjacent building where he saw something surprising. A shack was built atop the middle apartment and he hadn't even noticed it before. Its positioning on the roof hid it from prying eyes from below, and it appeared to blend in with the tarnished properties around it, camouflaging it from prying eyes on the roofs around it. This place had been built by a ninja, it was obvious, but by the look of wear on the wood that made up the home said that it had been there for years before Naruko was born. He watched as Naruko ascended a set of rickety concrete stairs behind the buildings before disappearing into the old shack, closing the door behind her. Naruko placed her groceries on the coffee table, taking out the frozen goods and placing them in the freezer lest they thaw. Stretching, she rolled her shoulder, feeling the pain from a few days ago gone. She fished around in her back pocket for a moment before withdrawing a very dog-eared little black book. Flipping it open, she flicked the pages until she came to the most recently used page. The book was filled with names, places, phone numbers, dates, times, prices and small comments on each of the jobs she had taken that entire year, with small ticks next to the ones she had completed while a few more jobs were left unmarked. Looking, she noted that her next client was Mrs. Hashimako Uzumi, the owner of a small diner. Uzumi-san wanted Naruko to help her set up a new set of hot plates as well as building a counter to set them up. The pay would be generous and would see her living comfortably for the next month or two. The only problem, she saw in her notes, was that Uzumi-san had no tools which she could borrow. That was okay, she had her own set. It was one of the first things she bought when she started taking these jobs. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Naruko froze. In the 10 years she had called this place home, that door had never once been knocked. One of the most crucial things she ever did was make sure that no one knew where she lived. If a client wanted to talk to her, she went to them, and if one of her current clients knew someone who might have work for her, she went to meet them. She had no friends that she could invite over, and she had never even given romance a thought, so that explanation was out. She was the only person who knew where she lived and no one knew about the shack. Meaning her door should never be knocked. The question now was, what would she do? Would she open it? Who could it be? What would they want? Despite her cool composure, she couldn't help but feel a little sliver of anger and unease. The shack was her home, her sanctuary, and had been since she was a little girl. She didn't like the idea of strangers invading the one place she called her own. Here she could do what she wanted, say what she wanted and be who she wanted to be, away from the eyes of the village. Slowly and silently, she went to her kitchen and withdrew from a drawer an old but very sharp knife. Holding it in a reverse grip behind her back, she inched towards the door, her bare feet pattering silently on the threadbare carpets that covered her floor, inching around the spots she knew were creaky, and took hold of the door handle, gathering her nerves. She redoubled her grip on her knife, took a few deep breaths, then jerked the door open. She stopped short, her eyes widened in an expression that would have been comical if you'd known her long enough, as she stared dumbly at the person in front of her. She didn't recognize the face, but she recognized the robes. You'd have to be blind not to. After a few long moments she finally managed a simple, "Hello, Hokage-sama." Now in her life Naruko had learned to roll with the punches, so to speak. If something went wrong or if something strange happened, she learned to adapt to the change and move on, never giving it a second thought. Her way of thinking wasn't, expect the unexpected. It was more along the lines of, go with the flow. It made life simple. However, having a man who is both a legendary ninja and the leader of her village, whom she had never even seen before, mind you, showing up on her doorstep in the middle of the day was something that gave even Naruko cause to pause for a moment. "Hello, Naruko." The Sandaime greeted back with a kind smile. There was a long and awkward pause as they each searched for something to say to break the silence. Really, it was that strange. "Well," Naruko ventured slowly, "this is an unexpected occurrence." Sarutobi chuckled as he removed his hat, scratching his balding head. "I suppose from your point of view, yes it is." There was another pause before Naruko eventually said, "I should probably ask this. Are you sure you've got the right house?" Sarutobi smiled somewhat bemusedly. "Yes, Naruko, I have the right house. I have wanted to talk to you for some time now." Finally managing to compose herself, Naruko calmly asked, "Is that so? May I ask what this concerns?" Sarutobi wasn't surprised by the guarded reply. Not many people were comfortable when a ninja came looking for you, and when that ninja was the leader of a village full of other ninja, it had to be suspicious. "I assure you, Naruko, you are in no trouble. I merely wish to speak with you for a while." Not fully satisfied with the non-answer, Naruko somewhat reluctantly pushed the door open fully and gestured inside. "I suppose you'd like to come inside then?" "Yes, please." Sarutobi nodded in thanks and stepped over the threshold, his hat respectfully in his hand. Naruko closed the door behind him and walked over to the kitchen area, depositing her knife in the drawer once more. "Take a seat. You'll have to forgive me if I don't offer much in the way of refreshments past a glass of water," she said. "I'm afraid my food budget doesn't leave much for entertaining guests." "Thank you, but I'm fine," Sarutobi replied, sitting at one end of the sagging couch. Naruko re-entered the sitting room proper and stood across from table, her arms folded across her chest for lack of anything else to do. Talking with the Hokage was one thing. Sitting beside him was another matter entirely. The fact that the couch was the only place to sit didn't help matters. "You mentioned something about wanting to speak with me?" "Indeed," Sarutobi said, mentally noting that Naruko wasn't much for small talk. He folded his hands in his lap as he leaned back into the couch. He was silent for a moment as he thought about how best to start. "To be frank, Naruko, there is much to talk about, covering many topics. I'm not entirely sure where to start." "Then the only place to start would be at the beginning, Hokage-sama," Naruko respectfully replied. Sarutobi liked this girl. She didn't cower in his presence, simper, show him any kind of favoritism beyond the respect his station afforded him, and she took control of the conversation. It seemed that Uzumaki Naruko wasn't one to back down before others. "Then at the beginning we shall start. The best place to start would be the orphanage you grew up in. Why did you run away? Why the interest, Hokage-sama?" "Please, Naruko, there is much I need to talk to you about, and to do that I need to understand what has happened in your life. I swear that's the only reason I'm asking." Sarutobi swore sincerely. Naruko looked at him long and hard before simply saying, "There's not much to tell. I grew tired of the solitude I lived through while under their care." "Solitude?" Sarutobi asked, confused. "What are you talking about? There were over 200 other orphans there during your time, as well as over 40 care staff. Sometimes it can be lonelier in an entire crowd of people than it can be in an empty room, Hokage-sama," Naruko replied softly. "While the caretakers looked after me as I was growing up, they did nothing beyond that. If I was scared, sad or lonely, they did nothing to cheer me up, and the other orphans often ridiculed me, implicated me when they got into trouble, and said it was my fault. A fact which the caretakers took at face value even when there was no viable proof, and barred me from all toys, games and outings. I quickly grew tired of it and set out on my own." She finished with a shrug. Sarutobi kept his face expressionless, but inside he was frowning. When he had left Naruko at the orphanage, he'd left specific orders that she was to be looked after and that any mistreatment would be grounds for imprisonment at best, execution at worst. The thought that the caretakers would show Naruko the bare minimum of care hadn't even crossed his mind, as foolish as it was. Naruko, unaware of the Hokage's thoughts, continued her story. After I left, I lived on the streets for a month or so, surviving on what others had thrown away. Eventually I found this place, and since then I've been living here, taking odd jobs in the village for money. Sarutobi was silent for several seconds before finally saying, I'm sorry that you had to endure that, Naruko. That is no way for a child to be raised. Naruko just shrugged nonchalantly. It wasn't your fault, Hokage-sama. Yes, I'm afraid it was. Taken aback but concealing it well, Naruko coolly replied, please explain. Sarutobi sighed heavily, unable to meet the girl's eyes. I was the one who delivered you to the orphanage when you were a baby. I personally handed you over to the caretakers there, signed the paperwork, hell, I even tucked you in before I left. Therefore your suffering at the orphanage was a direct result of my actions. He finally looked up at her. Her face was an icy mask, giving away nothing of her thoughts or feelings regarding the revelation. Her breathing was regular, her body relaxed yet perfectly still. The only indication that she heard him at all was a slight narrowing of the eyes. If you were the one to deliver me to the orphanage, then you must have been aware of the circumstances that made me an orphan, knew who my parents were, and if you, the Hokage, personally delivered me to the orphanage, then there must be a reason beyond mere kindness. I would like to hear those answers. Girls as sharp as a senbon. Sarutobi thought, impressed with the redhead's ability to discern that much information from his short statement so quickly, all of it true as well. Deciding to be straight with her, Sarutobi calmly replied, you're correct on all three counts, Naruko. I know of the story of how you came to be an orphan, and I knew your parents. Naruko stayed silent, waiting for the old man to continue. Sarutobi sighed and stood from the couch, pacing a little as he thought about how to answer. Ever since he sent out Kakashi's team to look for Naruko, he'd been trying to plan out the conversation with very little success. What would he say? What could he say? How did you go about telling a girl that you have never met since you dropped her off at an orphanage where she was miserable about the kinds of secrets you knew about her? Thinking hard, he let out a breath and sunk back onto the chair. Naruko had neither moved nor said anything, her icy gaze following the sandame. Before I can answer that, Sarutobi began slowly, considering each word. You need to understand the backstory behind it all. You know when your birthday is, correct? To his shock and horror, Naruko shook her head. No, I never saw any files about my birth, and whenever I asked I was ignored. Sarutobi closed his eyes, silently making a note to visit the orphanage and communicate his displeasure in person. Well, what they should have told you is that your birthday is October 10th. If you didn't already know, you're 14 now, 15 in a few months. Do you know what major even happened 13 years ago? The Kyuubi attacked the village. Naruko replied instantly. Everyone knew that. Sarutobi nodded. Indeed, it attacked without warning or provocation. We scrambled to form a defense, but against something like the Kyuubi, even our vast numbers were little more than a stalling tactic. That was until the Yondaime Hokage came up with a plan to defeat the beast. The general story is that the Yondaime killed the beast, losing his own life in the process. Naruko nodded slowly. This was common knowledge. That was a lie. Naruko's shoulders went slack as she stared at the Hokage in surprise. Sarutobi continued on. A biju is simply a mass of volatile sentient chakra. It can't be killed. So the Yondaime devised a plan to trap it. I don't know the particulars, but it seemed that he had been preparing for something like the Kyuubi attack for a while. He presented a scroll which he said held the details of one of the most complex fuinjutsu ever created, which he called the Shiki Fujin. The drawback is that sealing a biju as powerful as the Kyuubi into an inanimate object or an adult is impossible, as the destructive chakra that makes up a biju would tear it apart from the inside out. As a result, the only hope for the village's survival lay in sealing the biju into an infant. Naruko finished quietly, her blue eyes wide. If there was any doubt before, then it's gone now. This girl really is Minato's daughter. Sarutobi thought, impressed by the teen's insight. He nodded wearily. Yes, he said quietly, his eyes shadowed. Only a newborn's chakra system is capable of adapting to a biju's chakra so that they wouldn't suffer chakra poisoning and they would have a better chance of preventing demonic possession if they had become unconsciously familiar with a biju's chakra. The Yondaime knew this, and so he very reluctantly was forced to seal the demon in the belly of a child that had been born that very same day, thus saving the village. Naruko looked away quickly, her brows furrowed and her breathing slightly short. She swallowed with difficulty and looked back up at Sarutobi in a mixture of disbelief, anger and confusion. "And dare I hazard a guess that the child he chose was me?" she asked shakily, looking at the Hokage from the side of her eye. Sarutobi sighed deeply and nodded. Naruko tore her eyes from the old man in her home, her breathing now coming in sharp, shaky pants. A nervous cough escaped her and she ran a hand through her hair, grasping the strands at the back of her neck as she bit her lip. Her eyes darted about the room looking at nothing in particular as she paced quickly, her free hand clenching and unclenching for lack of anything else to do. If anyone had been familiar with her mannerisms, they would have been very concerned for the girl. This was probably the most emotion Naruko had shown in years, but unfortunately the emotions were anything but pleasant. How could I have a D-demon sealed in me? It couldn't be possible, the Hokage had to be lying. But why would he? What would he gain from telling me this? Damn it! Why the hell did he tell me this? She turned wide eyes to the ninja who was watching her with worry. She seemed to be going into a state of shock, but before he could calm her she spoke, her voice quiet and fast. "It can't be true. You're lying, it can't be true. I don't have a demon sealed in me, I can't have." "Naruko." Sarutobi tried, reaching for the girl. "You're lying," the usually composed redhead shouted, cutting off anything the Hokage would have said. He had to be. "I don't have a demon in me, I don't." Sarutobi sighed as the girl started to hyperventilate. He had been afraid that she'd react like this, but he didn't know her, so he didn't know how to respond to it. Instead he approached her. Naruko gasped and flattened herself against the wall as if hoping it would swallow her whole. Sarutobi flinched. The girl was shaking violently but rooted to the wall, her icy blue eyes wide and fearful. She almost looked like she was afraid to be hit or something. As slowly and non-threateningly as he could, Sarutobi got down on one knee before the teen, his hands spread open to show that he wasn't a threat. "May I?" he asked, gesturing towards her t-shirt. Naruko didn't say anything, her shaking eyes staring down at him. Sarutobi slowly lifted the front of her t-shirt just enough so that her belly button was exposed and pressed 2 fingers to her flat stomach, trying to touch her as little as possible for fear of her reaction. He lightly pushed his chakra into her and slowly but surely black markings began to spread over tanned flesh. Naruko stared at her stomach in both fascination and horror as the tattooed ink slowly faded into view, blurred edges becoming slowly defined until the black seal glared from her olive skin. Her denial, fear and anger left her like a flood, leaving her in a confused daze. She wasn't aware of the Hokage gently guiding her over to the couch before placing her down and heading off to the kitchen to see if she had any tea to settle her nerves. Her fingers lightly pressed against the darkness of the seal, rubbing it slightly as if hoping that it would rub off and that this was all a mistake. She watched the seal slowly fade back to nothing, but her fingers still traced the area it had once occupied, the image still vivid and raw in her mind's eye. "Here." Sarutobi's gentle voice broke her from her thoughts and she looked up to see a cup of hot green tea before her. With a nod of thanks she took the cup and sipped, feeling her unease dissipating. Her hands framed the ceramic mug, relishing in the warmth that was emitted as she stared at her reflection. "I'm sorry for the outburst, Hokage-sama," Naruko mumbled, not looking at the man. She was mentally chastising herself, having not lost control like that since she had been a little girl. Sarutobi's soft chuckle surprised her. "My dear, I think you were fully justified a moment of hysteria considering what you've been told. I feel lost and confused, I can't imagine what it must be like for you." Naruko took another sip, sighing softly at the familiar sense of warmth and comfort as the hot liquid slid down her throat. It was a surprise. "I'm still having trouble believing it." Her hand drifted down to touch her stomach through her t-shirt. She looked up at the Hokage, her rigid self-control quickly returning to her. "Why now? Why tell me this now after so long?" Sarutobi smiled ironically. "Well, for starters, we couldn't find you to tell you." Naruko forced herself not to flush in embarrassment. Sarutobi chuckled again, knowing how she was feeling. It was my intention to tell you eventually. This was of course information you needed to know. When you went missing from the orphanage, I sent out search teams to locate you, but we couldn't find any traces and the search was eventually called off. In a village the size of Konoha, it was easy for a little girl to get lost in the hustle and bustle. I heard rumors over the years of a little girl with whisker marks, but they were vague and far between. I always kept hope that you were alive and well. Unfortunately for Sarutobi, the cogs in Naruko's mind had started back up after her small outburst and quickly returned to their previous, lightning fast selves. The information she had was quickly sorted, sieved through and evaluated until she realized a few things the Hokage would have rather put off for a few years. Naruko took a large sip of her tea, leaning back into her couch and crossing one leg over the other. There's more, isn't there? More to what you've told me. Sarutobi tilted his head slightly. What makes you say that? Let's look closely at the information we have, she said calmly. The Yondaime. He apparently chose me to be the container for the Biju that attacked the village, sealing all its power within me. He wouldn't have chosen just anyone for this because it would be a tremendous leap of faith to trust a random child not to abuse that power. I also highly doubt that in the middle of a battle to save the village, he would know that a woman gave birth to a child, the only one to be born within the last few hours during the attack. Meaning he either took a special interest in my birth or he ordered vital support away from the battle to check the maternity wards for a freshly born child. I also have yet to hear about my parents, who you claim to know personally, meaning they must have been high profile. From what little I've read, Namikaze-sama wasn't one to abuse his authority or force his people into doing anything they didn't want to do. This means that he most likely didn't order my parents to give up their child for the sealing, or maybe in a moment of desperation he did. This also fails to explain the lack of preparation for my care after the fact. She placed her now empty cup on the coffee table and leaned forward on her knees, her fingers threaded together as she stared at the Hokage intently. So the questions remain. Why did the Yondaime pick me? How did he know that I was the only child who fitted the requirements for the sealing? Why did he place such faith in me? Who were my parents? How did he convince them to give me up for the sealing? What happened to them, and why was I left alone in the orphanage if I was such a high-profile person? Naruko's quick processing of all the facts coupled with the very quick rebound from her outburst staggered Sarutobi, catching him off guard. He didn't expect her to be able to read so much into what he'd told her this much. This was the kind of analytical skills most often seen in those from the interrogation division, or maybe even the strategists. What would he tell her? He'd wanted to keep some secrets for at least a little while longer. She had heard so much already, but was she ready for the full truth? I'm waiting, Hokage-sama. Naruko's voice broke through his thoughts. Sarutobi took a deep breath, silently wishing for his trusty pipe but unwilling to light up for fear of offending his host. Still, he could use a smoke at a time like this. He gave a small chuckle, shaking his head slightly. You're an incredibly insightful girl, Naruko. You'll do well in life, I'm sure. He looked up at the ceiling, trying to think of how to say this, and after a few moments spoke. Your questions are valid, Naruko. But if I tell you, then you must understand that this information mustn't get out. Not yet. It could very well be the spark that ignites another war if it got out. Do you promise not to speak of this without my express consent if I tell you what you want to know? Naruko's eyes narrowed slightly, but she knew that the Hokage wouldn't have gave her the ultimatum if it wasn't important. I promise, Hokage-sama. Good. Sarutobi sighed. Now as the yellow flash, Namikaze Minato had many enemies, mostly from Iwa, but there were some other places too that held enmity towards him. His life was in constant danger, as was the lives of anyone he associated with. I can tell you that in the months following the war there were a little over 20 assassination attempts on his life, mostly by teams of trained Junin. This made socializing very difficult, but regardless of this he still went about his life as normal. When the Kyuubi attacked, he knew that as the Hokage he couldn't ask any family to do something he himself would never do, and as such he sacrificed everything he had to save the village. This is all very interesting, Hokage-sama, but what does Namikaze-sama's personal life have to do with me? Naruko asked. My dear, it has everything to do with you. Sarutobi said, further confusing the teen. What nobody else knew, that 2 years before the Kyuubi attacked, the Yondaime found love with one of his newest Junin, Akuno Ichi from the former land of Whirlpool. They quickly fell in love, and a little over a year later the kunoichi became pregnant. What she didn't tell us was that she suffered from a rare genetic disease that made birthing a child extremely dangerous, almost a suicidal endeavor. She kept this knowledge a secret, knowing that many would try to dissuade her from carrying the pregnancy to term, even though it would mean her death. When the Kyuubi attacked, the kunoichi went into labor, and a few hours later she gave birth to a healthy baby but sadly died not long after. Wait. Sarutobi blinked at the interruption and looked down at Naruko, who was hunched forward in her chair, her hair covering her eyes. "Naruko? You don't have to say any more," she said softly. She rose from her chair and slowly walked over to the small window that looked out over the village. The sun was high in a cloudless sky, flooding the small shack with light. She folded her arms under her chest. "I thought you wanted answers to your questions, Naruko?" Sarutobi asked. "What was going on?" "And I have them, Hokage-sama. Well, most of them anyway," she said, not turning back from the window. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Now Naruko did turn. Backlit by the window, Naruko was wreathed in shadow, the sun's light glinting off her hair, framing her face in a fiery halo and her icy eyes glowing in the darkness. "He was my father, wasn't he?" Sarutobi choked on his own breath and coughed roughly. When he finally got himself back under control, he stared at the girl in shock. How did you know that?" he near demanded, more surprised than angry. Naruko gave a small shrug. "It wasn't that hard to figure out once you gave me all the information. You said that the Yondaime would never demand of someone else what he himself would never do, in this case providing a child for the sealing. I find it hard to believe that if the Yondaime was as noble as you say he was, that he wouldn't give up his own child for the sealing. You also said that I was the only child born the night of the Kyuubi attack, then said that Namikaze-sama's lover gave birth that very same night." Her head tilted to the side slightly, and although her expression didn't change, Sarutobi got the impression that she was smirking at him. 2 + 2 = 4. Sarutobi palmed his face with a groan. He'd made a mistake that he couldn't afford to make again. He had underestimated the girl because of her less than privileged upbringing and forgot that just because she was poor didn't mean she was stupid. He should have realized that within 5 minutes of talking to the girl. She'd already showed an incredibly sharp mind, finding intricate details in seemingly meaningless conversation so far. "Ibiki would probably buy me an entire first edition collection of Icha to get his hands on this girl," Sarutobi thought as he stared at the girl through his fingers. He sighed resignedly as he let his arm drop back to his side. "You're an incredibly sharp girl, Naruko. Just like your parents. I'm correct then?" "Yes." Sarutobi nodded. "Minato Namikaze was and is your father. And my mother? What was her name?" Naruko asked, a sliver of pleading entering her voice. These were answers to questions she had spent her entire life asking. Sarutobi smiled a fond smile, his mind taking him back to years gone by. "Her name was Uzumaki Kushina, and a more beautiful or more passionate woman you couldn't find anywhere. You know, except for your slightly sharper features and brighter eyes, you look just like her. Same red hair and tomboyish look as well." He chuckled. Naruko turned back to the window to hide the light coat of red that made its way to her whiskered cheeks. A swelling in her chest seemed to warm her entire body, and her face softened noticeably. The knowledge that she looked just like her mother was heartening, or maybe pleasanter. She didn't know how to describe it, but for the first time in a long while Naruko felt happy. Not that she'd been feeling depressed or down, but she hadn't felt actually happy in a long time. Numb was probably the best way to describe her usual state. Free of emotion but not emotionless. It was like she placed them aside until they were needed later on. "Thank you, Hokage-sama," Naruko said softly, her back still to him. "You have no idea how much that means to me." But slowly a frown began to slide onto her face, her features once more hardening into the icy armor that she wore so well. While she didn't want to diminish the feeling of the moment, there were still questions that had yet to be answered. Turning from the window, she faced the Hokage, her expression again one of formality. "Hokage-sama, if Namika," she took a breath. "If my father chose me for the sealing, then I assume that he also took the precaution of making arrangements for what happened to me afterwards. What happened there? If I was such a high-priority individual considering my parentage and the fact that I hold the Kyuubi, then why was I placed in the orphanage? Wouldn't it be more prudent to have placed me somewhere else?" A sudden thought came to her. And why haven't I heard of this before? Surely something as important as me holding the Kyuubi would have been common knowledge? Sarutobi jumped on the last question first. I passed a law after the attack stating that the knowledge that you were a Jinchuriki, that's a host of a tailed beast, was a secret of the highest order and that any who spoke of it would be punished severely. The younger generations were told that your father died killing the Kyuubi, thus keeping your condition a secret. He sighed, his shoulders slumping as he looked painfully at Naruko. I'd hoped that by doing this you would have grown up with some semblance of a normal childhood. Sadly, that was not to be. While they never spoke of your burden or raised a hand to you, the villagers didn't treat you with the respect you deserve, or the respect anyone deserves for that matter. You don't have to tell me how I was treated, Hokage-sama, I was there for all of it. Naruko said, ignoring the man's slight wince. What I want to know is what precautions my father had set up to protect me after the sealing. Surely there was something? She asked. Sarutobi looked uncomfortable. Before the sealing he had left this final request, that you be viewed as the hero you were, that you were to be commended for your part in saving the village, and by doing so he hoped that you would be taken care of by the village. When Sarutobi said no more, Naruko prompted, and then, he can't have, though that would be enough. He must have taken into account that not everyone would honor his wishes? Hokage-sama? Sarutobi looked away. Naruko's eyebrows rose to her hairline and she opened her mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come out. Looking off to one side, she took a breath to gather herself and wet her lips before glancing back at Sarutobi. Tell me he wasn't that foolish, she said lowly. Sarutobi looked imploringly at her. Naruko, he thought that they would honor his wishes. He had no idea that they would treat you the way they have, or that you'd grow up alone. Naruko let out a quick, incredulous breath of air and shook her head, still not looking at the Sandaime. She worked her jaw and her fingers dug into her arms where they folded under her chest. She couldn't remember when she had last felt this agitated or annoyed, and she quickly calmed herself before she got angry. Anger would achieve nothing. She paced the small room, trying to burn off some of the feelings welling up inside her. Namikaze Minato was praised as a hero in the last war. He was proclaimed a once-in-a-generation genius, and his tactics and jutsu allowed him to almost single-handedly bring Iwa to their knees and end the war. He was elected as the Yondaime Hokage because of his skills and because the people loved him. He was commonly praised as the greatest ninja of our time. You told me somehow foresaw that a disaster like the Kyuubi attack would befall Konoha, and he planned ahead by creating what sounds to me like one of the most complicated sealing techniques of all time. He organized his ninja with expert precision to hold back the demon so that the civilians could get to the shelters, then managed to place a very complicated seal on me before heading out to face the Kyuubi, where he managed to hold the demon off long enough to complete his technique and seal it into me. She stopped her pacing, staring up at the dark ceiling. Her eyes slid closed as she continued. He managed to accomplish all this, and yet he couldn't foresee that some people wouldn't honor his wishes? That some people who had lost their families and homes to the demon would set aside their grief and hail me as a hero, because he asked them to? A definite note of incredulousness entered her voice. Naruko shook her head as her eyes dropped to finally look at the Sandaime Hokage. My father was a damned fool. Naruko. Sarutobi snapped reprovingly. What? Naruko asked with a raised brow, completely unbowed by the Hokage's tone. Can you say that his plan was foolproof? Or even remotely effective? Can you honestly say that his plan contained any of the finesse or foresight he was famed for? Instead of logic, the man used blind faith to guide his actions. He had all those fail-safes and safeguards in place to protect the village, but none to protect his child, and I'm not only talking about possible threats from within the village but from without as well. I can't imagine that Iwa or indeed any of the other ninja villages were happy that Konoha had in its possession the Jinchuriki of the most powerful Biju to walk the land. It was only pure luck that none have sent assassins after me to ensure that Konoha wouldn't have the power of the Kyuubi to call upon in the future. Naruko shook her head again. As I said, the man was a damned fool. Sarutobi looked at Naruko worriedly. This was not how he had wanted things to go. Naruko saw his look and waved off his concerns. Don't fret, Hokage-sama. I feel no different about the village or my father. I'm not about to start taking revenge on those that have wronged me or swear to make my father's sacrifice in vain, but I'm also not about to have some miraculous revelation like swearing to protect the village to honor his sacrifice or something like that. The villagers ignore me as I ignore them. As for my father, She sighed, looking down. I don't hate him or even dislike him, but any respect I may have held for the man has been dashed. Sarutobi sighed wearily. It was the best he could hope for, he supposed. The girl was entitled to her opinion, and since she held no ill will towards the village, then there was nothing to worry about. He just hoped that with time her image of her father would improve. Now, was there anything else you needed, Hokage-sama? Naruko asked after a long silence. I imagine that there was some reason beyond simply wanting to inform me of my heritage that has brought you here? Naruko asked as she leaned against the counter. She glanced out the window to see the sun low at the sky, casting orange light over the world. It was getting late into the evening. Sarutobi shook his head. The girl was frighteningly accurate with her predictions. Forget a collection. Ibiki would probably buy me the majority shares in the Icha Publishers Company to get this girl apprenticed to him. He thought, as sharp as ever, Naruko. There is indeed a matter of great importance that pertains not only to you but to the safety of the entire world. Naruko's brows arched in surprise. This day is turning out to be something else entirely. Sarutobi folded his hands inside his robes as he began to pace, Naruko's cool eyes following his every step as he talked. Over the last few years, my former pupil, Jiraiya of the Sannin, has set up a network of information gatherers all over the world. It's one of the most advanced and widespread of its kind, I'm told. With this network, Konoha has benefited greatly, learning of attacks and enemy movement sometimes weeks in advance, allowing us to plan accordingly. He recently contacted me with some disturbing news. There is a freelance group calling themselves the Akatsuki operating within the elemental nations. We don't know where they are, who they are, or what their goal is, but what little we do know is concerning. It seems that they have been making discreet inquiries into other countries, building up their own network of contacts and spies in preparation for something. We haven't been able to find out what it is, but we do know one thing. Sarutobi stopped and looked Naruko dead in the eye. They're looking for the 9 Biju and their Jinchuriki. We don't know why, but from past experiences with people hunting for demons, we know that it won't bode well for anyone. And since I'm a Jinchuriki, that makes me a prime target for this Akatsuki. Naruko interpreted. Sarutobi nodded grimly. Yes, so far they've only been asking questions, not taking action. Unfortunately, we have no idea how long this will last until they make their move. We need to be prepared for when that happens. I assume you have a plan? Naruko asked. Several. That's why I waited until I met you. I need your input. After all, this decision will affect your life greatly. What are your ideas? Naruko asked as she leaned against the wall. Sarutobi lowered himself onto the couch, resting his elbows on his knees as he threaded his fingers before him. The most obvious choice would be putting you into protective custody with a round-the-clock guard of several anbu. You would be confined to an undisclosed location where you would be kept there until the danger passed, almost never being allowed to go outside or talk to anyone. This way, if Akatsuki do attack, then hopefully the anbu can either kill them or hold them off long enough for backup to arrive. I'm not sure I'm content with that, Hokage-sama. Naruko said coolly, her eyes narrowing. Who would volunteer to become a prisoner? I thought you wouldn't. Sarutobi agreed. It would have been miraculous indeed if Naruko had agreed. The second idea was for you to leave the village. We would provide you with a new identity, give you money to start a new life, and allow you to leave without incident, allowing you to make your own decision of where you'd end up. This way you'd hopefully be hidden from Akatsuki and you'd be able to live a free life. Naruko thought on it for a long time but shook her head. As appealing as that sounds, I don't believe the elders would just allow me to walk through the gate and be on my way. Not only because they may not like the idea of the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi being left to their own devices, but when the truth of my heritage eventually surfaces, and I hold no delusions that it won't, I can see them mobilizing everything they have to get the only child of the Yondaime back into the village. Combine that with the uproar from Iwa and I'd be hunted by not only the Akatsuki but by 2 or more of the major ninja villages. Very good points. Sarutobi concurred. Secretly he was pleased with her rejection. Out of all the options he could come up with, sending her out of the village was one of the last things he wanted to do. He promised Minato he'd protect his daughter, and although he couldn't make good on that promise in the past, he could at least try to make it up to her now. There was one more suggestion I came up with, but it is by far the most dangerous of the 3. I'm listening, Naruko said patiently. The third idea was, Sarutobi proclaimed, his warm brown eyes meeting with Naruko glacial blues. For you to be trained as a kunoichi of Konoha. Once more Naruko's eyebrows vanished into her red hair and she opened her mouth to say something but nothing came out. After a moment she finally managed a, "Pardon?" Sarutobi rose from the couch, clasping his hands behind his back as he went to stand before Naruko. "I propose that you be assigned to a genin team where you will be taught the ninja arts. This would allow you to learn to defend yourself against the Akatsuki and any other threats when the time comes." Naruko stared at Sarutobi for a long while before saying guardedly, "This isn't your attempt to harness the power of the Kyuubi, is it? Because if it is—" Sarutobi cut her off with a raised hand. Her accusation stung, but he reminded himself that she had every right to be a bit leery towards the idea. "No, Naruko, I would never do that. I only suggest that you learn to protect yourself. With Akatsuki on the move and when your parentage emerges, then you'll become a big name in the ninja world, and big names have big targets over them. If you do this, you'll be able to look after yourself if worst comes to worst." Naruko was silent as she contemplated the Sandame's rather radical idea. She, a civilian, becoming a ninja? Of course civilians became ninja occasionally, but that was when they were young and eligible for entry to the academy where they would be trained for years before they gained their hite atesh if they were skilled enough. When she was very little she had thought a lot about what she wanted to be when she grew up. Her decision changed nearly every day, usually transcending the gender barrier and into areas where little girls didn't usually want to work. She's wanted to be everything from a dancer to a chef to an actress and even a professional wrestler once. She'd sometimes thought about becoming a kunoichi as well, but when she left the orphanage to lead her own life she put such childish notions aside. She became a survivor, taking whatever work she could in order to live, and when there was no work to be had she was forced to resort to scavenging. She became a handywoman, lived as a handywoman and expected to die as a handywoman. She would just be a small shadow in the background of the village and she doubted anyone would notice when she finally passed on. She was content with that, having come to prefer to go unnoticed and unseen. If no one knew you were there, then it hurt less when they looked right past you as if you were a ghost. Plus she was comfortable by herself. She could probably be called a loner. She just liked her own company. But this kunoichi plan, would she take it? It was a decision that would change her life irreparably. This was military service, the kind you couldn't just back out of when you got tired of it. Ninja were entrusted with secrets and ninja leaders weren't adverse to arranging accidents for those that they suspect would sell on those secrets. Plus there was the killing part. Could she take another person's life? Not in self-defense or in a moment of blind anger, but a cool, calm, premeditated fashion? Her father could and so could her mother, but could she? She tried but words failed her. Looking up into the Hokage's eyes she said, "That's not something I can answer right away, Hokage-sama. There are simply too many factors to make my decision so rashly." Sarutobi nodded in understanding. He'd figured as much. "I thought that might be the case. It is after all a momentous decision. You don't have to decide right now. You can have some time to think about your options and maybe even think of some ideas yourself. You can take as long as you." 2 weeks. Huh? Sarutobi asked, confused. Naruko withdrew from her pocket a little dog-eared book, the same one she had been reading when the Hokage had knocked on her door. It was her job list. "I have jobs scheduled for the next 2 weeks and I make it a point to never back out on a job. I'll spend the next 2 weeks considering what you've told me and get back to you with a decision after they're done." "Are you sure?" Sarutobi asked. "You could have longer if you want. I'll only need the 2 weeks." Naruko said calmly as she tucked the little black book away again. "Okay then." Sarutobi nodded. "I guess that's everything unless you have any questions?" Naruko looked up. "Now that you mention it, I do have one. How did you find me?" "The genin at Tagiri's fishmongers told their sensei your name and I asked them to look for you. You've proven to be quite a hard person to get a hold of." He smiled at her. "That's strange." Naruko mumbled, mostly to herself. "None of my clients have ever had any trouble contacting me. Yes, well, those we'd talked to seemed very hesitant to help my ninja find you." Naruko blinked. "Why wouldn't they help the ninja find me? They could have gotten into trouble for that." "If there's nothing else?" Sarutobi asked, noticing how late it was. Naruko blinked again, clearing her mind. "Nothing, Hokage-sama. I'll inform you of my decision in 2 weeks." When the Hokage turned away, Naruko suddenly realized something. "Wait, I would appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone of where I lived. I like to keep the location a secret." Besides me and now you, no one else knows of this place, and I would very much like to keep it that way. I can understand that, Sarutobi said as he swung his tri-point hat onto his head. He moved to the door. Trust that not a soul will hear of this place's location from me. He looked over his shoulder at the young woman, a small smile playing about his lips. In 2 weeks then, Naruko. 2 weeks, Hokage-sama. Naruko replied, giving the ninja a small bow before he shuffled out of the shack, the door closing softly behind him. The next day, after she finished her usual morning routine of getting cleaned up, eating a small breakfast and tidying up any mess she made in the process, Naruko grabbed her toolbox, slid on her shoes and left the shack, reapplying the self-made lock as she did so. Descending the stairs, she made her way to the little cafe across the village. Azumi's cafe was located just opposite a small park. It was a quaint little place that had a homey feel to it. With a small fenced court in front and flanked by a few small trees, the place looked rather inviting. It was still early in the morning, so there were no people around. Izumi-san said she'd wanted the hot plates up and running for the daily rush, hence the early work hour, but Naruko knew it was because she didn't want anyone to see the redhead anywhere near the premises. If they did, then Izumi-san could lose business. Naruko didn't hold it against the woman. She entered the empty eatery, the bell above the door tolling twice to announce her entry. She heard a commotion coming from the area where the kitchen was located, and a moment later the aging, portly form of her client toddled out to meet her. "Ah, Naruko-chan," the middle-aged woman greeted happily as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. "My, you are punctual. 8 a.m. on the dot. I'm sorry you had to get out of bed so early, dear." "It's of no concern, Izumi-san." Naruko bowed to the older woman. As long as she'd known her, Izumi-san had been very affectionate towards children. It was probably because she had never had any herself, Naruko had mused. "The hot plates are just through here," the cafe owner said as she led Naruko into a small back room. It looked as though it served as some random storage space, with no shelves, fixtures or furniture in the space, just cluttered junk as well as 3 sealed boxes that looked new. Naruko carried them through to the counters where they would be set up and opened the first box. "I really appreciate all the effort, Naruko-chan. The charge to have the delivery men install it was almost as much as the things themselves," Izumi exclaimed, shaking her head in disgust. "It's no trouble, Izumi-san," Naruko remarked mildly, and the old owner ambled off, allowing the girl to get to work in peace. Although she had the instructions, Naruko made do with her own mind. This wasn't the first time she had constructed a hot plate in years of tinkering, and her own intuition guided her as she skillfully put the pieces together. It was no more than simply a case of inserting point A into point B, and before long she had a fully working hot plate set up on the counter, waiting to be used. As she worked on getting the other 2 operational, Naruko allowed her mind to wander to a topic that had kept her awake most of the night. That was of course the offer made by the Hokage the day before. She had been going over the Sandame's offer in her mind for most of the night, mentally evaluating all the angles and listing the pros and cons of becoming a ninja. She'd have a more reliable income, health insurance, the ability to protect herself from threats that would eventually make themselves known in future. But she would also be forced to take lives, risk her life for reasons that weren't her own, and sometimes be forced to do unscrupulous things for the sake of a mission. There was also the question of what would happen if she accepted but found that she couldn't go through with it. The minimum term of service for a ninja was 10 years, and barring personal or medical reasons there was no way to back out before your active service was up. If you really didn't want to fight or felt that your skills might be better used elsewhere, there was always the option of requesting a non-combat post, but you usually had to show a particular skill or ability for that, like code breaking or medical skills. She was pretty sure that if she did become a ninja and didn't want a combat post, she was smart enough to garner a position in either the intelligence or decoding branch, or failing that at the very least part of a relief crew. Naruko turned and pulled a pair of pliers from the toolbox and used them to attach the plug to the main part of the hot plate. All she needed to do now was set up the overhead light and the glass screen that would keep the head in while only allowing anyone behind the counter to take anything from the hot plate. She peered at her tools for a moment before selecting one of the screwdrivers. Holding the screws in her mouth so she'd easily find them, Naruko began to set up the rest of the hot plate as she once again lost herself in though. The one question it all came back to was, could she change her whole life away from that of a civilian to that of a ninja? Violence was prominent in the life of a ninja. They were fighters after all. But Naruko liked to think of herself as more of a passive person. She never got into fights if she could help it. It wasn't that she was afraid, she knew she could take care of herself, and the would-be robbers from the cafe yesterday could attest to that. No, she simply thought it too much of a bother to exasperate a problem by brining physical violence into the mix. Plus, she didn't need to. She was usually smart enough to sway people to her way of thinking. The problems she'd encountered with some people in the village were examples of this. The pickpocket from a few days ago was the main example of how to deal with someone who was easily swayed. Once she caught him, a simple show of her strength was enough to persuade him not to bother her again. She could have filed charges, but that would have been a waste of time, and he'd learned his lesson, so no harm done. She thought back to the merchant who denied her service when she first found the fruit market a few years ago. The man had been stubborn, and no matter what she tried, she couldn't get him to reconsider his actions. When he started raving for the anbu, she realized that all she would achieve by trying to barter with the man would have been trouble with the anbu coupled with making a scene. Since that didn't work, she chose the alternative. She had been at the age when she'd realized she had to start taking control and not allow others to dictate her life, so she formed a plan. She knew the other merchants in the market had seen the altercation, and they would think that if they simply did the same thing, she would go away and leave them alone. So she eliminated the heart of the problem. By convincing the other villagers that the merchant was selling food infected with insects, she had cut off his income and ruined him. She knew that he would tell the other merchants, and while the villagers believed that the cloaked person had been a male servant of a visiting lord and not the Uzumaki girl, the other merchants would believe a man they'd known for years. She'd waited until the man had packed up his business and moved on before returning to the market. She had met no problems from that day on. Of course, sometimes those options didn't always work. When those robbers burst into the cafe, she had immediately started to analyze the situation. The men were robbers in a predominantly civilian district who were confident of their success, and by the lack of nervousness they had done this sort of thing before, so convincing them to leave would have been difficult. They were three burly men with knives, and she was a young girl, so intimidation was an impossibility. When the robber had grabbed her, she knew that the only way to end the confrontation was through physical action. This showed she could be physical and violent, but she preferred not to. Thus, she was a pacifist. She used her mind to get her out of situations, but if someone left her no choice, then she'd show them she was not someone to trifle with. Naruko glanced at the clock on the wall, noting she had to get a move on if she wanted to get out of the cafe before the customers arrived. An hour was all it took to get all three hot plates up and running, perfectly timed so that none of the clientele would see her in the cafe. She was just putting away her tools when Izumi came bustling out again. "Oh, you're done already," the elderly woman exclaimed as she saw the three gleaming machines on the countertop. "You certainly know your stuff, Naruko-chan. Here's your pay and a thank you for the trouble." She handed Naruko an envelope of cash and a plastic container filled with freshly made stew, Izumi-san's specialty. Naruko took the money and tucked it into her jacket. She didn't count it. Izumi-san was too kind-hearted to try to cheat someone. But Naruko wasn't the most trusting person. She'd count all her money later on when she was finished for the day. She took the container full of stew with a nod of thanks. Izumi-san also made it a habit to put something together when Naruko was working for her, no matter how much the redhead protested. "I appreciate it, Izumi-san. I'll bring the container back tomorrow morning. Call me if you need anything else." With that, Naruko left the cafe, heading towards her home. She wasn't about to let a good stew go to waste. "Good job. You can collect your pay from the office downstairs." Dismissed. Team 7 trooped out of the Hokage's office after yet another mission. After a solid week of near fruitless searching for Uzumaki Naruko, they were eager for something to break the monotony. Sadly, what they weren't expecting was to return to an old monotony when the Hokage issued them with the only mission available: capturing Tora the cat. 4 hours of constant running after the elusive feline had left them sweaty, tired, dirty, and not to mention, scratched to hell. Tenten's arms were covered in thin red marks, and even Sasuke hadn't gotten away without a few nicks, but Kiba was by far the worst. It looked like he had gone head first through a wood chipper, with dozens of painful-looking scratches covering him and a few twigs in his hair to go with the bloody bite mark to the nose. Tora hadn't appreciated it when the young Inuzuka had tried to kick it into a pond. They got some vindictive satisfaction from seeing the ginger cat being smothered by its owner, who cried loudly but happily now that she had her baby back. "You three collect your pay and go home. I'll see you tomorrow at the usual time," Kakashi said as he stayed behind. "Is that by our watch or yours, because I could do with a good lie-in?" Tenten called from the hallway. "Wise ass," Kakashi muttered as the door closed. "Lazy ass," Tenten quipped back right before the door snapped shut, cutting off Kakashi's retort and securing the last word for the kunoichi. "I suppose you want something, Kakashi?" Sarutobi asked, not looking up from his reports. "Yes, sir," Kakashi said as he turned back to his leader. "I was wondering how things went with Naruko." "I figured as much," the Hokage said. He finished scribbling his signature and placed the report off to one side before giving Kakashi his full attention. "Do you want a general response or a response by topic?" "By topic, I suppose." Kakashi shrugged. "Well, for the most part she was damn near impossible to read," Sarutobi said, startling the Junin. Sarutobi laughed at the look on the other man's face. "I know. Imagine a Kage having trouble reading a 14-year-old civilian girl. She carries herself well. Well, she was mostly unresponsive when I told her who placed her in the orphanage to begin with, but I could tell by the look in her eyes that she was less than pleased. That reminds me, I need to have a chat with the care workers there soon," he murmured, remembering Naruko's description of her treatment there. He placed that thought aside for now and continued. She was taken aback by finding out what really happened on October 10th, and her reaction to discovering what she is was understandable, but she calmed quickly. He shook his head in wonder. "I swear that girl has one of the most analytical minds you'll ever find. And she'd been off balance with everything I told her. Imagine what an intelligence like that could do when she was calm." "What about her parents?" Kakashi asked quietly. "What did she say when she found out about them?" Sarutobi looked a little somber, but understandingly so. She was happy to know that had parents and that they loved her. She especially liked hearing how much she looked like Kushina. A small smile tugged at his lips. Although she hadn't smiled, that one memory of the look on her face was enough to warm the old man's heart. "And Minato?" Sarutobi grimaced slightly. She actually discerned the truth of her heritage from just a few tidbits of information. I really need to work on that, it could be a serious disadvantage. She seemed accepting that as Hokage Minato would have chosen his own child to help save the village, but when she found out his lack of preparation for the fallout, she was less than impressed with our revered Yondaime. So am I, after hearing things from her perspective, although I'm no better. But Minato-sensei didn't have a lot of time. He had to hurry to save the village. Surely she can forgive him for being a little frazzled? Kakashi tried to defend his former master. Sarutobi looked at him patronizingly. "Kakashi, the man was a world-renowned genius. Can you look me in the eye and say that at no point between the time he first came up the idea to seal the Kyuubi and actually doing it that he could have come up with a better idea for her protection than ask that they see her as a hero? I love the village with all my heart, but even I'm not that delusional. I followed his wishes, but after talking to her I'm thinking that if she hadn't disappeared I'd have been dealing out harsher punishments. Naruko doesn't hold any resentment for Minato or the village, but she's less than impressed with him at the moment. Whether she changes her views is up to her. I'll have no say in the matter unless it threatens the village." Kakashi grimaced but nodded his agreement. Hearing it from a different point of view did put another spin on it. "What did she say when you told her about Jiraiya-sama?" Sarutobi stared at him before slapping a hand to his forehead, groaning loudly. "I really am getting old. I completely forgot about him." "How could you forget a 6-foot-tall white-haired toad summoner that you trained for years?" Kakashi asked dryly. "He's never in the village anymore and I have a lot on my plate. It's easy to forget people." Sarutobi defended himself huffily. "Will you be telling her next time you see her?" Kakashi asked, getting them back to the topic at hand. "Oh no. He'll be back in a few months to report on the Akatsuki, he can tell her himself," Sarutobi said as he leaned back into his chair, folding his arms across his chest stoutly. Kakashi winced. "Kind of you throwing him to the wolves, isn't it? On his own head be it." Sarutobi dismissed the accusation with a wave of his hand. "I understand that Minato's death hit him hard, but he had a duty towards his goddaughter. One he chose to ignore. I tried to convince him otherwise, but he wouldn't take her. I offered alternatives, but he wouldn't budge." Sarutobi fumed over the memory. The last meeting between teacher and student in the aftermath of the attack before Jiraiya started to travel the world was not a pleasant one. Sarutobi walked through the dark hallway of the rundown motel. It was one of the few buildings that had escaped the destruction, having been on the opposite side of the village from where the attack happened. Although by the looks of the place it was probably better off being reduced to rubble. He never knew how his student could be comfortable in places like this, and the different shouts, bangs and moaning drifting from some of the rooms failed to improve his opinion of the place. He stopped outside of the room where his target was registered and knocked softly before letting himself inside. The room was, if it were possible, in worse shape than the rest of the building. The curtains were drawn, throwing the place into shadow, and instead of a floor there was just a sea of empty sake bottles, some smashed and others not. The few amenities that were in the single bedroom were either askew or broken completely. The sole occupant was much worse, however. Completely shattered was how to best describe Jiraiya. Dark rings surrounded his eyes and there was a zombie-like slump to his shoulders. A strong musk of cheap sake smothered him in a choking cloud, but he didn't notice as his dark eyes stared blankly ahead. He swayed slightly from where he was perched on a chair beside the small table, yet another jug of alcohol clutched in his large hand. He didn't seem to register Sarutobi as he entered the room, closing the door softly behind him. "I'm surprised there was this much sake still left in the village," Sarutobi commented casually as he stepped over the numerous bottles. "I thought that all the booze that hadn't been destroyed had already been drunk." He sat at the table across from Jiraiya. "It has now," the man gruffly replied as he tossed the now empty bottle aside, uncaring as it chipped the bedside table where the glass shattered against the wood. "I doubt the manager will be impressed with you wrecking his motel." "He can kiss my hairy ass," the toad Sannin grumbled as he glanced around for another bottle. Sarutobi stared at his distraught student for a few long moments before saying softly, "Don't you think you've had enough, Jiraiya?" The younger but still old man seemed to contemplate the question before he shrugged nonchalantly. "I'm still conscious enough to drink, aren't I? That suggests I'm not drunk enough." He managed to find a still full bottle and popped the cork, tossing the stopper aside. Sarutobi sighed and plucked the jug from Jiraiya's hand before he could take a sip. Holding it out of the large man's reach, Sarutobi said gently but sternly, "I'm here to talk, Jiraiya, and I don't intend to try and discern your drunken incoherent mumbles." "Give it back." Jiraiya glared at him as he held out his hand for the bottle. Taking a leaf from Jiraiya's book, Sarutobi flicked the bottle towards the sink where it shattered, the narcotic liquid disappearing down the drain. Jiraiya's glare intensified, but Sarutobi remained composed. He'd seen far scarier things than an angry drunk. Seeing that his glare was having no effect, Jiraiya crossed his arms with a huff and leaned back in his chair, staring moodily at his former teacher. "So what do you want? If it's about that Hokage business, then you can forget it." Sarutobi shook his head with a weary sigh. "No, Jiraiya, I'm not going to ask that you become the Godem. I already asked and you already rejected the offer. I can see that you won't change your mind anytime soon. Just as long as we're clear." Jiraiya mumbled as he stared down at the stained table separating them. "If it's not to get me to take up the hat, then why are you here?" Sarutobi snorted and looked at the Sannin with a raised brow. "Come on, Jiraiya, I know for a fact that you're smarter than that. You already know why I'm here." Jiraiya heaved a great sigh, raking a hand through his wild hair. "Naruko," he whispered, still staring at the table. Sarutobi nodded. "Homura and Kaharu are getting treatment at the medical tent, and Danzo is organizing the Anbu to patrol the walls for any sign of enemy ninja. We're going to meet up at the old Shinto shrine east of the Hyuga compound where Naruko is being looked after, and bring her to the Hokage tower to discuss what will be done. You'll be needed at the meeting." Jiraiya blew out a large sigh and looked at the Hokage with tired, bloodshot eyes. "Sensei, I just want to get out of here as soon as I can. I don't think I can be around Konoha much, at least not for a while. It's just too hard." Sarutobi frowned at that but made sure his voice sounded understanding. "I know that. I wouldn't think of keeping you here against your will, Jiraiya, it wouldn't do anyone any good. I understand that you need some time away to deal with Minato's death, but there are some things you need to attend to before you leave." "Like what?" Jiraiya asked as he leaned his crossed arms on the table, his long hair shadowing his eyes. "Your goddaughter?" Sarutobi reminded him dryly. "Oh yeah." Jiraiya remembered with a noticeable slump. This concerned Sarutobi, but before he could comment on it, Jiraiya spoke, somewhat nervously if the Hokage's ears were correct. Listen, sensei, I've been thinking. Jiraiya began, brushing his hair out of his eyes, but those eyes weren't looking anywhere near the Hokage but at an empty bottle of weapon oil on the floor. Jiraiya chewed his lip in nervous thought as he continued. I mean, with everything that's happened, Minato dying and the state of the village right now, that may be I mean, I thought that perhaps. Yes? Sarutobi prompted slowly, his eyes boring into the side of Jiraiya's skull. Jiraiya risked a glance at his leader but swallowed hard and quickly looked away again. That maybe I. Just for a little while, mind you. That I postpone, taking custody of Naruko? He finished, his voice taut with nerves at the end. What? Sarutobi asked coldly, his steely eyes narrowing. Just for a little while. Jiraiya quickly defended himself, waving his hands in front of him to calm the Hokage. Or maybe to protect himself from a beating. Let me get this straight. Sarutobi began lowly, his voice stiff with frost. You want to leave a little girl, your goddaughter no less, alone while you go off to drown your sorrows in some bar on the other side of the world? What the hell is wrong with you? Jiraiya flinched as if physically struck by the level of venom in his teacher's voice. He hadn't heard the Sannin talk to anyone like that since the war, but he'd never been on the receiving end of it. Now he knew why people feared and respected the third Hokage as the god of shinobi. His face scrunched in shame and he was forced to look away from the look of cold fury on the older man's face. It's not like I'm abandoning her completely. He weakly defended himself. I will come back, I just need to get my head on straight, Deal with some things first. Things like what? Drinking yourself into a coma? Peeping at the bathhouses? Finishing another of your damn books? Sarutobi shouted with mounting rage. His knuckles were white under the sleeves of his robes where his hands were fisted so tight that his nails were drawing blood. No, I just need some time to come to terms with Minato's death. Jiraiya shouted back, both offended and angry. You were the one that always told us during our training that burying emotions for too long wasn't healthy. You said you didn't train us just for us to go insane under the pressure. No, I didn't train you only for you to buckle under the weight of your own emotions. Sarutobi agreed through grit teeth. But I also didn't train you to be cowards. That's not what this is. Then explain it to me, Jiraiya. Sarutobi shouted back. It was only through great force of will that he managed to stay in his chair and not pace the room. Explain why you want to abandon your goddaughter now when she needs you most. She just lost both of her parents and she's now forced to undertake a duty that we cannot even fathom both without her knowledge or approval, so please explain in words that I can understand your great plan that involves leaving that girl by herself. Jiraiya sighed in frustration and rubbed his red-rimmed eyes with the heels of his palms as he tried to find the best words to explain it. Licking his lips he tried, it's just that being around people right now is tough, plus with the village being as weakened as it is right now, the other countries will be testing the waters for an invasion. I'll need to be getting in touch with my contacts to find out what they know. I'll be on the road constantly, plus with the state I'm in right now I'll be the worst possible person to entrust her to. Hell, Orochimaru would be a better choice at the moment. Sarutobi's face scrunched in annoyance as he shook his head. That's so much bullshit, I can actually smell it, Jiraiya. You're just fishing around for any excuse now. That's not it, he exclaimed loudly, throwing his hands into the air. I have a duty to the village as an information gatherer. What about your duty to your goddaughter? Sarutobi thundered, his voice shaking the room with its intensity as he slammed his fist down on the table, nearly breaking it in half and causing Jiraiya to jump a foot in the air. He pressed his hands flat against the dirty wood and loomed over the taller man. His teeth were bared and his eyes were slits. Enough of this worthless tripe, Jiraiya. You will tell me here and now your reasons for not wanting to take custody of that girl, or I swear I am done with you. I don't. Jiraiya fumbled as he tried to bring any argument to bear. Sarutobi growled in frustration and shoved himself away from the table. It's probably better that Minato is dead. That way he wouldn't have to see what his master becomes when things get difficult. He said bitingly. Yeah, well, I'll never know how he feels now, will I? Jiraiya mumbled bitterly, not knowing the Sannin could hear him. Naruko took care of that. It happened so fast that Jiraiya didn't even catch it. One moment his teacher was standing on the opposite side of the table with his back to him, and a heartbeat later the table was launched aside before Sarutobi slammed him into the wall with enough force to crack it, his hand encasing the Sannin's throat with metal-rending pressure. Jiraiya's eyes bulged and he clawed at the deceptively thin arm, trying to ease the pressure enough to take a single breath, but Sarutobi's grip remained true. Normally he could physically overpower his smaller teacher, but Jiraiya was still pretty drunk and Sarutobi was pressing against the arteries in his neck while holding his windpipe closed, making his body feel heavy and sluggish. Sarutobi's teeth clenched so tight that he thought his jaw may break as he glared at his former student with enough heat to outburn the sun itself. His grip tightened a fraction and he watched as Jiraiya's movements became more weak and slow as the lack of oxygen began to take its toll. He eased up his grip and watched as Jiraiya coughed violently, taking in large hasty gasps of air, his eyes watering. "Jiraiya, look at me," Sarutobi ordered menacingly. The younger of the two looked at his teacher but flinched back at the look on his face. He'd never seen Sarutobi-sensei looking like that before. "Jiraiya," Sarutobi warned, and Jiraiya forced himself to look the man in the eye. For the very first time Jiraiya actually feared his teacher. Sarutobi spoke slowly and clearly, making sure the Sannin understood his every word clearly, for he was deadly serious about what he said. "Jiraiya, what you just said both concerns me and disgusts me. I thought you were a better man than that, and I know that Minato and Kushina are probably rolling in their graves right now. They'd be disgusted with you. Now you will look me in the eye, Jiraiya. And you will tell me the complete truth of how you feel about Naruko, and believe me, boy, if you try to deceive me I will sever all ties with you and make sure Naruko never learns of her so-called godfather. Do you blame Naruko for Minato's death? Speak quickly, for my tolerance for you is quickly reaching its limit." Jiraiya's face filled with anguish and he went slack, hanging limply in the Sandame's grip. "Of course I don't blame her," he said, his voice thick with tears. "She's my goddaughter. I love her." He brought his head up and Sarutobi was unsurprised to see the rivets of tears running down the man's face. Jiraiya was at that moment every part the heartbroken man. "But it's hard, sensei. So damn hard. Ever since the ceiling, every time I look at her all I can think about is Minato and Kushina, and it breaks my heart. All I can think about is the days I spent with them. Minato was my son in all but blood, and he meant more to me than my own life did. When he told me about Kushina and Naruko I didn't know who was happier, me or him. I know I've never been pegged at the family type of guy, but for the first time in my life I felt like I was actually part of one. Minato was the son I was proud of. Kushina was the daughter-in-law I doted on, and Naruko was the granddaughter I'd spoil rotten. But now that's all gone. When I look at Naruko all I can think about is the family I lost and the fact that I might have to raise a child and tell her why she doesn't have any parents, and the thought terrifies me more than anything ever has before. When I thought about it, it was as though I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking, everything started to spin, and I felt like I was going to spew. My first instinct was to get away, and that's what I did. Look at me, sensei. Can you honestly say that you'd trust me to care for a child the way I am now? Hell, I can hardly take care of myself, never mind a baby. I can't do it, sensei, I just can't." Jiraiya broke down and Sarutobi released him, allowing the large man to slide down the wall, where he cried with great heaving sobs. He looked so pathetic at that moment that Sarutobi couldn't help but pity him. For a second he didn't see Jiraiya the Toad Sannin. He saw little Genin Jiraiya, the young impulsive boy that fumbled with the most basic things but never gave up, striving to overcome his rival and best friend. He was forced to admit that confronting Jiraiya when he was drunk and in mourning probably wasn't the best idea. Sarutobi sighed and knelt beside the man, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder as he let him clear his soul. It was a long time before anything else was said. Jiraiya's tears had stopped, but neither moved, each basking in the relative silence of the darkroom. "Jiraiya," Sarutobi's gravely voice eventually spoke quietly. "I don't like this, but I can understand it. Do what you feel is best, but I should warn you that this will affect both yours and Naruko's lives. If you think that by not being around her will benefit her in the long run, then go for it, but don't expect it to be an easy thing to come back from. Leave if you feel you must, but I will tell you here and now that I wash my hands of this entire matter. What happens in the future is between you and Naruko, and I will not be dragged into it by either side. This is a family matter and it should be dealt with as such. I just hope that this decision doesn't come back to haunt you." Jiraiya placed his large hand over Sarutobi's smaller one where it lay on his shoulder, giving it a small pat of thanks. "You and me both, sensei. You and me both." Sarutobi's eyes were clouded over as he thought back to that lonely motel room and the discussion that took place inside of it. Jiraiya had left the next day after spending almost an hour alone with Naruko. He didn't know what, if anything, was said and he didn't want to know. Over the next 14 years Jiraiya had been doing what he did best, gathering information. He'd be the first to testify that Jiraiya's actions greatly benefited the village during those years. Many attacks had been thwarted, spies caught and corrupt officials ousted because of the Toad Sannin's information network, and he'd recently uncovered a grave threat under the guise of the name, Akatsuki. Neither of them knew what this organization was up to, but Jiraiya was getting closer, rooting out more and more pockets of invaluable information about the shadowy group that was looking for knowledge about his goddaughter and people like her. Sarutobi hadn't told Jiraiya of Naruko's disappearance. Mostly because Jiraiya was a spy and a fighter but not a tracker, and if the village's best trackers couldn't find her then no one could, but also because he didn't want his student to do something drastic, whether it be in regards to finding Naruko or as an act of self-punishment if he believed her disappearance was somehow his fault. Whenever he inquired about her in his sparse letters, Sarutobi had told him that she was fine but little more. Perhaps he hoped that the lack of information would coax his student back home. He didn't really know his own motives. He fully intended to get Jiraiya back in the village. If anything, they found that link to Naruko's disappearance seemed concerning, but thankfully that didn't happen. How do you think she'll react? To Jiraiya-sama being her godfather, I mean? Kakashi asked, drawing the Sandame out of his thoughts. The Hokage sighed with a shrug. I really don't know. That girl surprised me so much already that without getting to know her better I doubt I could predict anything she would do. If I would hazard a guess, then I think she'd be accepting of him as her godfather, but as to him leaving her alone. He sighed again. I don't know. We'll see in a few months, I suppose. Kakashi was silent for a moment before venturing, Hokage-sama, if I may be so bold? What options did you offer Naruko to protect her from the Akatsuki? Sarutobi stared at Kakashi for a long time, as if judging him, before leaning back into his chair, closing his eyes as he rested his head against the stuffed leather. I gave her 3 main options for her to choose from. The first was round-the-clock Anbu protection in an undisclosed location for an undisclosed time. Sounds like she'd be more of a prisoner than a VIP. Kakashi observed. Sarutobi nodded but didn't open his eyes. She thought so as well. Didn't like the idea of being cooped up in a place where she didn't have control. I can guess that she'll pass on that idea. The second was relocation. We provide her a new identity and give her the money to go anywhere she likes. It would draw the attention away from the village and she'd get a chance of hiding while starting her life over. But that would… Kakashi was cut off by the Hokage's impatient wave of a hand. I know all that, so does Naruko. He shook his head in wonder. I swear that girl is probably one of the smartest teenagers I've ever met. She analyzed every angle and weighed the pros and cons while taking into account any possible future repercussions in moments. Hell, if we didn't know who her parents were you'd think she was part Nara. She turned down that idea. She seemed intrigued by the third idea. Really? Kakashi asked. What was that? Sarutobi threw Kakashi's small smirk. That she become a kunoichi. Kakashi spluttered through his mask, his single visible eye wide with shock. What? But she's a civilian and too old and hasn't been trained in. Kakashi, you're rambling. Sarutobi interrupted. He waited for the Junin to reclaim some composure before continuing. I know she's too old to join the academy and I'm also aware that she hasn't received any training, but this is really the best option. This way she learns to protect herself from any possible threats either from Akatsuki or by someone wanting revenge on the child of Namikaze Minato. I'm actually surprised by your outburst. I'd have thought that you'd be overjoyed to hear that she has expressed an interest in following in her parents' footsteps. Sarutobi remarked. Kakashi slumped slightly and scratched the back of his head. I guess I'm just adverse to anything that would put Minato-sensei's daughter at risk. I still am. I'm not really comfortable with her going out on missions. Well, fortunately that isn't your choice. Sarutobi quipped and watched as the man's eye twitched slightly. You can't keep her wrapped in bubble wrap just because she's a link to Minato. You forget that this girl has been looking after herself all her life, and I doubt she'd welcome a person she's never met telling her how to go about her business. She certainly displayed that with me." He chuckled. "She acknowledged that I am the Hokage, but she didn't let me walk all over her. She made sure that the conversation we had was one between equals, albeit with one equal slightly more authorities than the other. She's her own woman. I think calling her a girl at this point would just be insulting." Kakashi grumbled a bit but let it go. Crossing his arms he asked, "So what did she say?" "That she'd need time to think about it. Understandable considering that this isn't the kind of decision to be made lightly. I'm actually proud that she didn't just jump on board without giving it some intense thought. If she did, I would have withheld on the offer and make her think about it before going ahead with it." "Whose team would she be on?" Kakashi asked, slight lounging in his voice. Sarutobi chuckled at the man. "Wishing you held off on taking a team for a little while longer?" He guessed correctly. Kakashi had the grace to look sheepish and chuckled lightly. "Kind of. I chose to go ahead with it this year because I'm the only one left in the village, except perhaps the Hyuga maybe, that could teach Sasuke how to properly use his Sharingan. Just as long as you don't forget about your other students," Sarutobi reminded him. Kakashi just waved him off. "Nah, I'm not the kind of guy to do that. I'm the kind of guy that'd probably forget about all three of them. That's the reason I have the team picture beside my bed, so that when I wake up I remember that I had to teach the little nose pickers." "Yet you roll over and go back to sleep for a few hours?" Sarutobi asked dryly but with a small bemused smirk. The gray-haired man shrugged. "I need my beauty sleep, and besides they're young, it'd do them good to learn some patience." Sarutobi just shook his head. Kakashi was as eccentric as nearly every other one of his ninja, though he'd never admit it. Briefly Sarutobi wondered if any of the other Kage had such strange subordinates. "Did she say when she'd give you an answer?" Kakashi asked. "She said she had jobs scheduled for the next 2 weeks. She'll give me an answer when she's done. But the thing that I can't understand is how she'll learn to be a kunoichi." Kakashi said, confused. "Like you said, she's too old to enter the academy, and unless you plan on apprenticing her to someone, I don't see how this will work." Sarutobi just waved off his concern. "One thing at a time, Kakashi. We'll wait until we have her answer before going into the details. Everything will work out in the end. I hope so." He glanced at the clock in the wall. "I'd better go. I promised Guy I'd meet him for some training." Propping his chin on his hand, Sarutobi gave the Junin an exasperated look. "And what time were you meant to meet him again?" "About an hour and a half ago." Kakashi shrugged as he left the office, pulling his book from his pocket as he walked. A perverted giggle floated up the hall a few moments later. "Does that man have no shame?" Sarutobi asked his empty office as he shook his head. For Naruko the next 2 weeks passed somewhat hazily. She recalled working and getting paid but little else beyond that. Even though she didn't usually have anything to do besides working or reading the small collection of books she still usually remembered nearly everything she did during any given week. She had even been startled to realize that it was Saturday and she arrived at the fruit market for her weekly shop an hour later than usual. It was the Hokage's offer. That was what was causing her numerous lapses in concentration. The memory of their conversation popped into her head at the most inopportune moments. When she had been repairing a hole in Arisan's roof, she had been thinking of the offer too intently and paid for it when she missed the nail and hit her thumb with the hammer, and when you're as strong as Naruko was, then hitting yourself with a hammer proved to be quite painful. She had thought about it nearly every minute for the entire 2 weeks. Whether she was working, eating, showering, or simply laying around doing nothing, she thought about it. Even reading couldn't provide a distraction, and she often found herself staring at the same sentence for hours on end before finally giving up. She had been back and forth over the issue. It seemed that no matter what she did, she couldn't come up with an answer. Did she want to become a ninja? The answer was, she didn't know. She had weighed all the pros and all the cons, but still she couldn't come up with a definite answer. Now she knew why children were entered into the academy at such a young age. If they chose earlier, it not only made it easier for them to burn the information they learned into their minds, but they also didn't overthink their choices of becoming a ninja. They simply thought it was cool, that their parents would be proud of them, and that by enlisting in the military they were fighting for their home. Naruko, however, knew nothing of these concepts. Never having grown up with a family, she didn't know what it was like to strive for her parents' approval, to want to make them proud of her. Knowing that she had parents and knowing them were two very different things. For the very first time in her life, Naruko decided she needed assistance. She was loath to call it help. This, however, proved difficult, for a friendless orphan confidants were hard to come by. She knew a lot of people, but they weren't her friends, they were her clients. Then she remembered. There was one person she could go to. It had taken a while to find it. She had to painstakingly search each and every stone she came across, but never finding the one she was looking for. It was the final day of the 2-week waiting period she promised the Hokage, and she was determined to give him her answer before the sun set. Even though she started early in the morning, leaving straight after her breakfast, it still took the best part of a day to find what she was looking for. When she did find it, the sun was already low in the sky, orange light bathing the village in a pleasant glow. Naruko stood before the stone, which was located on a small hill overlooking the village, the cool breeze tugging slightly at her short hair as she gazed upon the inscription. Here lies Uzumaki Kushina, loving wife, caring mother, friend to all. July 10, 1566 AF to October 10, 1590 AF. Who dares, wins. Naruko slowly approached the grave marker, her heart beating at tempo against her ribcage. She knelt on the evenly cut grass and lifted one hand to gently trace the engraved letters of her mother's name, her fingers gliding over the smooth marble. She was thankful that whoever commissioned the grave marker, she had a feeling it was the third Hokage. They acknowledged her mother as a wife even if she never got the chance to marry her father. If Naruko was a romantic person, she'd have said that you didn't need to have a big fancy ceremony to be considered someone's spouse if the love between them was strong enough. "Hi, Mom?" she said quietly and uncertainly, feeling the unfamiliar word roll of her tongue. She was astounded by how right it sounded, like she had been saying all her life. Before today, she might have considered someone talking to a grave marker confusing and strange. The person they were talking to was dead, so how did they expect their loved one to hear them? But that was then, and Naruko didn't know any other way to try and get her answer. Besides, she had wanted to talk to her mother all her life, and if she couldn't do so in person, then she'd do so in spirit. "It's me, Naruko, your daughter. I'm sorry I haven't been to visit before, but I didn't know your name or where you were buried." "Wait, that's not true. I did know your name was Uzumaki, but I didn't know your first name or whether or not Uzumaki was your family name. It's strange, I didn't even think to check for any graves marked Uzumaki. If I did, then I would have visited sooner. I'm sorry." Her voice cracked a little and she hastily cleared it. She swallowed and licked her lips nervously, trying to think of what she wanted to say. She was silent for a few minutes before finally continuing. "I met the Hokage recently. It was a surreal experience, to say the least. Here was the most powerful man in the country sitting in my living room like it was the most natural thing in the world. Definitely not what I had in mind in the way of guests. He told me all about you and Dad. Yeah, I know all about him, and what he did. I don't know if you know what he did since you passed on before it happened, but..." She stopped suddenly, realizing that what she was about to say was extremely classified. She scanned the area looking for any possible eavesdroppers but saw none. She scooted closer to her mother's grave marker and lay her head against the cool stone, closing her eyes and trying to feel anything that would suggest her mother could hear her. "Dad, he used me to help stop the attack. Not used in a bad way per se, but stopped the attack through me. He sealed the Kyuubi into me. I don't really understand it all, but he managed to somehow trap the beast and put all of its energy inside me, but it killed him in the process. I don't blame him if you're wondering, but I don't necessarily like him right now." She said it quietly, almost shamefully. "It's just, he was always lauded for being so smart, for being a genius, but he didn't make any plans for how I was to be looked after once the sealing was over. He just asked that they see me as a hero, but nothing beyond that. I just don't know how a man who's so intelligent could be so blind." She sighed. This was the first time she could talk to her mother in any way, and she didn't want to mar it with this discussion. It was still too raw. She shook her head slightly against the stone. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to vent. I suppose it's strange, hearing from a daughter you know of but don't know personally, eh? I'll tell you about me, how's that? Well, I'm 14 now, 15 in a few months. My favorite color is purple. I like anything spicy." For the next hour Naruko knelt there beside the grave of her mother, telling her everything she could think of about herself. She didn't know why, but she kept her treatment by the village a secret, not really wanting to get into that. She was surprised by how much she actually spoke. Even counting the meeting with the Hokage, the conversation, one-sided though it may be, was the longest Naruko had ever talked in her life. She was actually startled by how easy it was to talk about herself. Usually she was extremely private and hesitant to give out any personal information to anyone. Even many of her clients only knew her second name, and that was only because she was the Uzumaki girl. She was so caught up in her spiel that she didn't notice the sun sinking lower in the sky until she stopped to catch her breath. Remembering her silent vow to give the Hokage an answer by the end of the day, Naruko decided to get down to the main reason she was here. "I need your help, Mom," she whimpered as huddled beside the marble marker. "The Hokage came to see me 2 weeks ago. He told me of an organization, Akatsuki. He said they've been inquiring into neighboring lands, looking for information on people like me, Jinchuriki. We don't know much except that they're very dangerous and that eventually they'll begin to move. We don't know when that will happen, but the Hokage doesn't want to risk it. He offered me a few options in the way of protecting me. He even offered to give me the money to start a new life somewhere outside the village, but I can't leave. Eventually my heritage will emerge and then I'll have people looking for me, and I'm afraid I don't blend in well." She muttered softly, tracing the thin whiskers on her cheeks. The other option the Hokage suggested was extreme to say the least. "He offered me training as a kunoichi. Can you believe that? He offered a 14-year-old civilian enlistment when I've never held a kunai in my life. I couldn't believe it. I told him I needed to think about it and I need to give him my answer today. I've been going over the idea in my head constantly for the last 2 weeks and it's been frustrating me to no end. I keep going over all the pros and cons and I don't know how many lists I've written, and yet I still can't decide. I've never liked fighting. I'll fight if I have no choice, but I prefer to find another way. What if that option is taken away from me? What if I have to fight when I don't want to? What if I have to kill?" Her voice was a silent whisper near the end. Her eyes scrunched tightly shut and she leaned against the cold marker as though seeking comfort from the thought. "I don't know if I can do it, Mom. I don't know if I can kill someone. I know you and Dad were able to somehow, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm strong enough. God, I wish you were here." Against her will a single tear managed to break free and glided down her smooth cheek before falling to the grass silently. Naruko hugged her knees and buried her face into her arms as her frustration overwhelmed her. She didn't cry, but she was damn close to it. For probably the first time since before she left the orphanage, she wasn't Uzumaki Naruko, the diamond-hard ice queen with the amazing strength and sharp mind. She was simply a girl who was all alone in the world and who wanted nothing more than for her mother to hug her and take all her pain away. "Help!" Naruko's shaky whisper was muffled by her arms. "Please, help me. I don't know what to do, Mom. I tried, but I can't make this decision alone. Please help. Mommy, please?" Just as she was about to break, Naruko felt something land softly in her hair. Confused, she reached up and plucked a single leaf from her red locks. Just then a small breeze kicked up the rest of the leaves scattered around her, pulling them into its wake and causing them to fly around her. She watched them as she felt the wind gently caress her. Unlike the usual cool breeze that you'd associate with late evening, this one was different. Instead of being chilly or cold, this one was warm. It wrapped around her like a blanket and she felt her frustrations and uncertainties ebb away into nothingness. Suddenly the wind shifted and the leaves flew into the air above her, twisting and dancing in a silent ballet. The wind shifted again and the leaves were blown away from the hill, drifting back towards the village. She felt a tugging in her hand and she looked down to see the leaf in her hand being pulled by the wind. Unthinkingly she let it go and it immediately took off after its fellows, twisting and winding as the wind propelled it towards Konoha. Naruko sat there silently, her eyes staring after the leaf before she blinked and turned to her mother's grave. "Was that your answer, Mom?" she asked softly. The wind tugged at her hair slightly. Naruko blinked slowly and felt a small tug at her lips that she did nothing to suppress. Slowly, her icy facade melted away, the serious lines of her face vanishing, and for the first time in too long, Uzumaki Naruko smiled. It was a small thing, but anyone who saw it would testify to their dying day that in that moment, Naruko looked absolutely breathtaking. "Thanks, Mom," Naruko said softly. "I think I have my answer now." After all, she announced as she rose to her feet. She turned back to the carved marble and she traced the inscription. "Who dares, wins, right? Filled with new purpose and bearing a feeling of content that she had never felt before, Naruko left the cemetery, making her way back towards Konoha. Sarutobi sat in his office finishing some last-minute paperwork when there was a knock at the door. He set aside his pen and pipe before leaning back in his chair. "Enter," he called. The door swung open and through it strode Uzumaki Naruko. Sarutobi blinked. There was a change about the girl, something that hadn't been there before. Instead of commenting on it, he remained silent as the girl stopped before his desk, her back straight and her chin high. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. "I trust you have come to a decision?" "I have," she replied resolutely. Sarutobi folded his arms as he leaned upon his desk, his browns locking with her blues. "And what is your answer?" Naruko didn't even blink when she gave her reply, her voice filled with steadfast determination. "I'm in." Sarutobi smiled widely. "Then let's get started."
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.